Daniel Mercer had one end of the walnut desk, and a furniture mover had the other when Ruth walked into the print shop on the third morning after Frank's funeral. "Watch the jam," Daniel said. "Dad would have had a fit if you gouged that." The mover stopped. Daniel glanced over the polished edge and saw Ruth standing beneath the brass bell above the door, still holding a cardboard tray with 3 coffees in it. "Oh, morning." Ruth looked past him. Frank's office had already been stripped of its framed advertising prints. His leather chair was gone. A pale square marked the place where the desk had stood for 37 years. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "Wanted to beat the rain." Daniel adjusted his grip. "This thing weighs more than it looks." "I know. I helped carry it in." He gave her the thin smile he used when someone had said something inconvenient during a practical task. "Claire wants it for the house. It was Grandpa Mercer's. The shop uses it. You can get a desk at Staples." Behind Ruth, Luis Mendoza came through the production door, wiping blue ink from his fingers. He looked at the desk, then at Ruth. The presses were silent, which made every small sound embarrassing. The mover's shoes squeaking, the refrigerator clicking under the coffee counter, Daniel breathing through his mouth. Daniel nodded toward the production floor. "Everything back there is yours, Ruth. Nobody's touching the business." As if he were leaving her a bowl full of diamonds instead of 2 old presses, a leased copier, 11 unpaid vendor bills, and enough unfinished work to keep 3 people awake for a month. Ruth stepped aside so they could pass. The brass bell gave a cheerful little jingle when Daniel backed through the door with his father's desk. The furniture mover murmured, "Sorry for your loss." Daniel said, "Pivot." The desk disappeared into the wet gray morning. Luis came to stand beside Ruth. "That coffee for me?" "One is." "Which one?" "They're identical." "Good. Frank always got me hazelnut because he thought I liked it." "You hated hazelnut," with a depth that surprised even me. She handed him a cup. Jean Bell emerged from the small restroom, tugging the hem of a purple cardigan into place. At 63, Jean wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and could make a customer feel unreasonable by becoming exceptionally polite. "Did Daniel just take the desk?" she asked. "No," Louise said. "The desk decided to spend more time with family." Jean looked into the empty office. "He took the chair yesterday." Ruth set the last coffee on the counter. That one had been Frank's. She had bought it automatically, black with 1 sugar, and only noticed when the cashier slid the tray toward her. She peeled back the plastic lid and poured it down the little stainless steel sink. Neither Jean nor Louise pretended not to watch. There were rain spots on the front window. Beyond them, Daniel's silver SUV sat at the curb with its rear hatch open. The desk would not fit, which Ruth could have told him. Daniel measured spaces with confidence instead of tools. He tried angling it once, then twice. The mover stood with his hands on his hips. Finally, Daniel pulled out his phone, irritated at the weather for not respecting the Mercer schedule. "He'll need a truck," Louise said. "He owns one now," Ruth replied. Frank's restored green pickup had gone to Daniel with the rest of the trust property. The lake cabin had gone equally to Daniel and Claire. So had the house on Oak Ridge Avenue, the investment account Frank started during his first marriage, the watches, the dining set, the silverware, and the furniture Frank had described as family pieces, even though Ruth had dusted it for 26 years. Mercer Print letterpress had gone to Ruth. Frank had called that security. 2 weeks before he died, he had lain propped against hospital pillows while Ruth held a paper cup of ice chips near his mouth. His fingers had worried at the blanket as if searching for an invisible switch. "You'll have the shop," he had said. She thought he meant she could sell it. "Don't fret about money. Shops always provided." She had looked at his face, trying to decide whether he believed that or needed her to pretend he did. Frank's heart was failing. His pride remained in excellent condition. "I'm not fretting," she told him. That was the last conversation they had about money. Now, Ruth walked into the empty office and saw 4 dents in the carpet where the desk had been. A pencil had rolled against the baseboard. She picked it up. Frank had sharpened pencils with a pocket knife, leaving long, uneven facets around the wood. He refused to use the electric sharpener Jean bought because it ate the soul out of them. Ruth slipped the pencil into her cardigan pocket. On the folding table Daniel had left behind lay the estate inventory. Claire had attached pink sticky notes to the pages. Family was written on one. Personal was written on another. The shop equipment occupied 3 lines near the bottom, followed by the phrase transferred as operational business assets. The presses had names in Frank's head, histories, moods. On paper, they were operational business assets. At least one of them had not been operational since Easter. John leaned against the doorframe. You want me to call about a replacement desk? No. We can move the order table in here. No point. Jean's eyes shifted toward Luis, then back. They had been doing that all week, passing whole conversations around Ruth without making her listen. She laid the estate inventory face down. 9 o'clock, she said. We should talk. Luis checked the wall clock. It's 8:57. Then enjoy your 3 carefree minutes. He lifted his coffee in salute and returned to the production floor. Jean stayed. Claire called. About what? The advertising prints. She wants to know if the glass can be cleaned with regular window cleaner. Ruth laughed once before she could stop herself. It came out sharp enough to hurt her throat. Jean waited. Tell her vinegar and water, Ruth said. No ammonia near the paper. You're nicer than I am. I know more about glass. At 9, they sat around the scarred work table in the bindery area. Rolls of paper crowded the wall racks behind them. The room smelled of ink, dust, warm wiring, and the peppermint Jean kept in her desk drawer. Ruth had known that smell longer than she had known either of Frank's children. She had come to Mercer Print at 41 to correct an invoice for the accounting office where she worked. Frank argued with her for 20 minutes over $8.14. Then he found the error, walked 2 blocks in the rain to apologize, and brought a bag of lemon cookies that tasted like furniture polish. He had been 50, broad-shouldered and recently divorced, though not nearly as recently as he behaved. Ruth had not fallen for charm. Frank's charm was mostly persistence with clean fingernails. She fell for the way he could run his palm over a printed page and detect pressure she could not see. 26 years later, his fingerprints still seemed to cover the room. Ruth opened the blue ledger she had brought from home. The business checking account has $6,412. Luis lowered his cup. Jean said, That includes the Kessler deposit? It includes all deposits. How much is actually ours? Very little. Ruth turned the ledger so they could see the numbers, though neither reached for it. We owe Allegheny Paper $9,000. We owe the copier company $3,100 plus this month's lease. Utilities are current. Payroll clears Friday. After Friday? Luis asked. After Friday, we'll have around $2,800. John removed her glasses and cleaned them with the edge of her cardigan. Frank told me the hospital system paid. They paid the last invoice. They also ended the contract. The hospital system had shifted its forms and patient packets to an online supplier in Ohio. Frank had known for 3 months. He told Ruth they were renegotiating. Luis leaned back, making the metal chair creak. And Bollinger Foods? Gone? Since when? January. Luis stared at the ceiling. Jean put her glasses back on. Ruth had discovered that loss the night after the funeral, sitting at the dining table while strangers' casserole dishes covered the kitchen counters. Bollinger had accounted for nearly a quarter of Mercer Print's annual sales. Frank had kept issuing work orders under the company's name, then marked them delayed when no order existed. He had not stolen anything. There was no second account, no secret vice, no grand betrayal she could point to and enjoy hating. He had simply kept believing that if he concealed each bad month, a good month would arrive before anyone added them together. You both need to start looking, Ruth said. Jean's mouth tightened. For what? Jobs? No. That wasn't a question. Good, because that wasn't an answer. Luis rubbed a thumb against a blue stain on the table. What are you doing? Closing properly. The words seemed to alter the air pressure. Ruth continued before either could interrupt. We have customer property, deposits, and jobs in progress. We finish what we reasonably can. We refund what we can't. Then we sell the equipment and close. Luis's face gave away less than John's, but his thumb stopped moving. How long? A month? Maybe 6 weeks? The Heidelberg alone takes longer than that to list. The Heidelberg is not running. It runs. It makes a noise. So does Jean. We haven't liquidated her. Jean turned to him. You'll wish we had. The joke landed softly, then died. Ruth folded her hands over the ledger. She had practiced this in the apartment at 4 that morning, facing a row of unpacked boxes. She had expected anger. She had not expected them to look frightened. Jean had worked at Mercer Print for 19 years. Louise had been there 14. Ruth knew their hourly rates, their emergency contacts, the dates they preferred to take vacation. She did not know what either had in savings. "I can't ask you to gamble your futures on Frank's pride," she said. Louise looked toward the press room. "Frank ever tell you why Bollinger left? They got a cheaper bid. They got tired of late deliveries." Ruth's spine stiffened. "That wasn't what he said." "I know." "You knew?" "I knew they were unhappy. I didn't know they were gone. And you didn't tell me. Frank was my boss. I did the books. Frank was still my boss. There it was, plain and ugly. The border Frank had kept inside his own business. Ruth could balance accounts, soothe customers, clean up his promises, and put her savings into payroll, but information moved through him. Even when his hands trembled too badly to set a plate, he had remained the gate every truth needed permission to pass. Jean touched the ledger. "Ruth, what did Frank leave unfinished?" "I don't know yet. Then maybe we should know before we decide what's reasonable." The front bell rang. All three turned. A man in a brown raincoat stood at the counter, holding a plastic envelope against his chest. Ruth recognized him after a moment. Paul Dempsey from Dempsey Sons Funeral Home. Frank always called him Paulie, though Paul was nearly 60 and hated it. "I'm sorry," he said when Ruth approached. "I know the timing is awful." "That's all right." He set the envelope down. Inside was a photograph of a silver-haired woman wearing red lipstick and an expression of private amusement. "I'm here about the memorial cards," he said. "For Evelyn Shaw. Frank said they'd be ready yesterday." Ruth knew Evelyn. Not well, but enough to remember that she ordered peach pie at the diner and sent it back if they warmed it. Paul slid a yellow receipt across the counter. "Paid in full" was stamped at the top in Frank's hand. "When is the service?" Ruth asked. "Tomorrow morning?" Behind her, Louise exhaled through his nose. Ruth looked at the empty office, the folding table, the rain thickening against the glass. Then she looked down at Evelyn Shaw, who appeared far too amused by the situation to offer any sympathy. "How many?" Ruth asked. 200. Ruth picked up Frank's unevenly sharpened pencil. "Louise," she called, "tell me what still works." Louise looked toward the production room, as if the machines might answer for themselves. "The cutter works," he said. "The folder works if Jean doesn't kick it." "I kicked it once," Jean said. "You kicked it twice. The second time was personal. It knew what it did. The small offset press is fine. The Heidelberg runs, despite the slander going around. The copier prints black clean. Color has a line down the right side." "How far from the edge?" Ruth asked. 3/8 of an inch. Then we cut off 1/2 inch. Louise considered her. "That's one approach. It's the approach we're using unless Evelyn asked to be buried with a white stripe through her face." Paul Dempsey made a sound that might have been a laugh, and then covered it with a cough. Grief had rules about when laughter could be admitted. Ruth had learned that at Frank's visitation, when Jean whispered that the funeral director had powdered him like a donut. She opened the plastic envelope. Behind the photograph was a typed sheet with Evelyn's full name, dates, service information, and a line from a hymn. Frank had written M-17 in the corner. "Jean, do we have a file?" Checking. Jean disappeared into the front office, remembered there was no desk, and moved to the order computer on the shipping counter. Louise picked up the photograph by its edges. "This scan's going to show every scratch. Can you fix it?" "Some. How long?" "That depends on whether you want her to look like herself or like she's selling skin cream." "Like herself." Paul nodded. "Definitely herself." Evelyn distrusted any picture taken after 1989. Ruth turned the yellow receipt over. Frank had charged $260. With paper, toner, trimming, and the hours they were about to spend, it was another of his favors, disguised as an invoice. "Paul, did Frank show you a proof?" "He said he would email one." "He didn't?" "I called twice." Ruth saw the apology gathering in his face and stopped it. "You paid. You did your part." Jean called from the back. Found it. The file was dated 12 days earlier. It contained a template and nothing else. Frank had opened the previous memorial card they had made, renamed it Evelyn Shaw, and apparently considered the job underway. Louise pulled a chair to the computer. "I need the photo." Ruth handed it to him. Paul lingered at the counter. "If it can't be done—" "It can," Louise said. Ruth looked at him. He kept his eyes on the monitor. "Probably." We'll have them at Dempsey's by 8. Paul's shoulders dropped. Thank you. Don't thank us until you count them. After he left, Ruth locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. The shop had not officially reopened after the funeral, but people had come anyway. A florist had picked up envelopes. A real estate agent had left 3 voicemails about listing sheets. Someone had pushed a handwritten note through the mail slot asking whether Mercer Print still sharpened paper cutters, though Ruth was fairly sure they never had. Jean began searching the stockroom for the cream cover paper Frank had specified. Louise scanned Evelyn's photograph and enlarged it on screen. Tiny cracks appeared across the dark background like lightning. Ruth stood behind him. You breathing on my neck won't make this faster, he said. I'm 6 feet away. You have a very supervisory 6 feet. She moved to the shipping table. Frank's pencil was still in her pocket. She took it out and began comparing the service details to the old template. Evelyn's surname was misspelled. The funeral home address was 2 years out of date. The hymn line had lost a word. Stop, she said. Louise's hand froze over the mouse. This template is wrong. It's Frank's file. That's why I'm checking it. Jean came in carrying an opened carton. I've got 140 sheets. We need 100, Louise said. We'll need more when the copier eats some. The copier doesn't eat. It grazes. Ruth corrected the text while Louise repaired the worst scratches in the photograph. She had watched him work before, but always in pieces while answering phones or passing through the production room. His hands were large and square, better suited to lifting paper cartons than moving a cursor, yet he adjusted the image with patient little motions. Frank had talked about Louise as though he were an unusually dependable wrench. Where did you learn that? She asked. Community college. You went for design? I went for 2 years. Then my mother got sick. Ruth waited for more, but he had already returned to Evelyn's hairline. Jean counted sheets, tapping each stack against the table. His work was good. Frank never let him talk to customers. Louise glanced at her. You saving up all your opinions for today? No, this is maybe a third. Ruth looked at the restored photograph. Evelyn's red lipstick had emerged from the gray cast, and the amusement in her eyes looked less private now, as if Louise had let the rest of them in on it. It's good, Ruth said. He shrugged. It'll print darker. I know. That made him turn. You do? I've been standing in this shop since you were deciding whether to go to community college. I thought you did books. I did whatever Frank was late doing. Something passed across Louise's face. Not embarrassment exactly, but a small correction. They printed the first sheet at 11:23. The copier placed a pale blue line through the final card on the right. Louise shifted the layout left. The next sheet came out with Evelyn's photograph too dark, her red lips floating in shadow. Cheerful, Jean said, like Dracula's aunt. Louise adjusted the contrast. At noon, the copier announced that its magenta cartridge was empty. Louise opened the cabinet beneath it and found 3 cyan cartridges, 2 yellow and no magenta. Frank ordered supplies by instinct, he said. His instinct liked blue, Ruth replied. Jean called 2 office supply stores. Neither stocked the commercial cartridge. Ruth called a small copy center across town, whose owner, Naomi Price, had sent flowers to Frank's service. Naomi had 1 magenta cartridge for the same machine and was willing to sell it, but she could not leave her counter. Ruth took Jean's keys because Daniel had Frank's truck and Ruth's Buick was at the house, wedged behind the estate company's van. Jean's 12-year-old hatchback smelled like peppermint, fast food, and a damp dog Ruth had never seen. Naomi's shop occupied half of a converted laundromat beside a tax preparation office. She was 34, with shaved hair, silver glasses, and an expression that suggested every request had interrupted a better idea. I'm sorry about Frank, she said, setting the cartridge on the counter. Thank you. He hated my website. He hated all websites. He said mine looked like an arcade. He thought anything with more than one color looked like an arcade. Naomi smiled. You closing? The question came without softness, which Ruth appreciated. In a month, 6 weeks at most. That's quick. The debt isn't. Naomi rang up the cartridge. I might be interested in the cutter. We're not listing anything yet. You just said you were closing, and you just sold me toner. We're both moving fast. Naomi's smile widened. Call me when you list it. Back at Mercer Print, Louise had cleaned the copier's rollers, and Jean had found 3 more unfinished jobs in the rack beside the folder. One was a menu revision for Sorrento's, promised for Friday. One was a booklet for the North County Recovery Alliance, whose deposit had cleared 5 weeks earlier. The third was a stack of business cards with a note in Frank's handwriting. Call, spelling. Spelling of what? Ruth asked. The man's name, ideally, Jean said. They installed the cartridge and ran another proof. This time Evelyn appeared warm and clear, framed by a thin burgundy border. Ruth folded the sheet along the center and ran her thumb over the edge. Grain's wrong, she said. Louise took it from her and bent it gently. The paper cracked along the fold. Jean looked at the open carton. It's the stock Frank ordered. It's cut the wrong direction. Louise checked the label. She's right. Frank had taught Ruth paper grain during their first year together by tearing 2 sheets on their kitchen table. One ripped straight and one wandered. He had explained it with the solemnity of a man revealing fire. Later, whenever she showed interest in the actual production work, he told her not to worry her pretty head about it. Frank could be generous with knowledge as long as he remained the one giving it. Can we turn the layout? Ruth asked. 2 up instead of 4, doubles the runs, but it folds clean. Louise glanced at the clock. It folds clean. They worked through lunch. Jean called the customer with the questionable business cards and learned his surname contained 2 N's, while Frank's file contained 1. Ruth phoned Sorrento's and admitted the menus would be late. The owner swore in Italian, then in English, then agreed to Monday when Ruth offered to print 50 temporary inserts at no charge. Frank always said tomorrow, he told her. I'm saying Monday. You sure? No, but Monday is the truth. By 7, the floor around the cutter glittered with narrow cream strips. Ruth's shoulders ached from stacking. Jean had gone home to bring back sandwiches and returned with enough food for a union meeting. Louise kept the copier running by opening and closing its side panel whenever it flashed an error. At 9:14, the last sheet emerged. Jean raised both hands. Nobody touch anything. The toner has to set, Louise said. I know. I'm building suspense. They waited, surrounded by warm paper and the low mechanical hum of a machine that had outlived several service contracts. Ruth ate half a turkey sandwich without tasting it. Frank's coffee cup sat beside the sink where he had left it the last time he worked. Blue type along the side read, World's okayest boss. Louise had given it to him as a joke, and Frank had used it for 11 years without once admitting it was funny. Ruth picked up the cup. Trash? Jean asked. She almost said no. Then she dropped it into the bin. It landed on the empty toner cartridge with a hard ceramic knock, but did not break. They folded until after midnight. Louise wanted to use the folder, but Jean said it would scuff the photograph, and for once, he did not argue. Their hands settled into a rhythm. Lift, align, crease, stack. Ruth's fingertips became dry from paper. Jean told a story about Frank trying to print metallic ink through the copier and denying it even while gold fingerprints covered his shirt. Louise confessed that he had unplugged the Heidelberg twice and blamed power failures because Frank insisted on running jobs that would cost more than they earned. You sabotaged the press? Jean asked, delighted. I protected it from management. Ruth folded another card. Any other confessions? Louise's smile faded. Probably. The answer sat between them longer than the joke had. At 1:30, they boxed 200 finished cards and 12 extras. Ruth wrote Dempsey, Evelyn Shaw on the lid. Her handwriting looked strange beside Frank's old job numbers, narrower and more upright. Jean carried the leftover sheets to storage. Louise wiped the cutter bed. Ruth opened the rack beside the folder and removed the 3 jobs Jean had found. There were more behind them, not 3, not 6. A crowded row of yellow envelopes leaned against one another, some marked with deposits, some with dates already passed. Frank had turned the front envelopes sideways so they concealed the rest. Ruth pulled them out one by one and covered the work table. Louise came to stand opposite her. Jean stopped beside him. Nobody joked. Ruth counted 22. The oldest promise was 7 weeks late. She rested both palms on the table, surrounded by the work Frank had hidden and the money other people had trusted him with. 6 weeks, she said. Jean glanced at her. To close? Ruth looked at the boxes of Evelyn Shaw's memorial cards. To finish what we owe. Louise picked up the oldest envelope and read the name. North County Recovery Alliance. The booklet, Jean said. 800 copies. He opened the flap and whistled quietly. 48 pages. Ruth looked at the date. Can we do it? Here? Yes, in the time Frank promised. Unless we get a second Thursday this week, no. What did he charge? Louise showed her. Jean leaned over, adjusted her glasses and said, maybe he thought the 48 meant dollars. The estimate was less than half what the work should have cost. The deposit had been large enough to spend and too small to buy the paper. Ruth put the envelope on the left side of the table. Possible, but late. She made 3 rows, jobs they could finish, jobs that required a phone call before they knew, and jobs they had no business accepting. The 3rd row grew first. Frank had promised foil-stamped invitations without owning foil equipment. He had accepted a deposit for 5,000 waterproof labels on a stock Mercer print had never used. He had taken an order from a local historical society for a hardcover book, though the shop could print only the pages and would need to outsource the binding. He must have planned to send some of this out, Ruth said. Louise said nothing. What? He stopped paying the trade binder in November. Ruth stared at him. Why? I don't know. You keep knowing the first half of terrible things. I worked the presses. He didn't show me accounts. You knew enough to unplug machinery. That was machinery. And this is the business the machinery was supposedly for. Jan inserted herself between them by taking the waterproof label envelope from Ruth. We should postpone the murder until after the memorial cards are delivered. Paul gets fussy about blood on cream stock. Ruth pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. Louise returned the hardcover book envelope to the table. I'm not defending him. I know. He'd come back here after his cardiology appointments and make plans. New accounts, new services, equipment we'd buy after the next quarter. If I said we didn't have the people, he'd tell me I'd gotten negative. That sounds like him. He wasn't right near the end. Ruth lowered her hand. He was right enough to hide the envelopes. Louise looked toward the front office. That was the part none of them could soften. Frank's heart had weakened. He forgot names and repeated stories. He also turned the job envelopes sideways and put the newest ones in front. Confusion did not arrange camouflage that neatly. Ruth stacked the rows together again. Go home. Both of you. Jean looked at the clock. You're going home? Yes. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Jean collected her handbag. Louise shut off the production lights, leaving only the green exit sign glowing above the back door. They made Ruth promise not to call customers at 2 a.m. When they were gone, she sat alone at the folding table in Frank's empty office. Rain tapped the front windows. The yellow envelopes covered the space where his desk had been, each one carrying a name, an amount, and a promise made in his handwriting. She wanted him alive for 5 minutes, not back forever. She could not imagine surviving the funeral twice. 5 minutes would be enough to put the envelopes in front of him and ask whether he had left her the shop because he loved her or because he could not bear to be the one who closed it. The question had nowhere to go. Ruth opened the ledger and began adding deposits. At 7:45, Paul Dempsey found her outside the funeral home with 2 white boxes balanced against her hip. She had changed into the clean blouse she kept at the shop, but there was toner beneath one thumbnail. You didn't have to deliver them yourself, he said. Yes, I did. He opened the top box under the portico. Morning light fell across Evelyn Shaw's face. Paul lifted one card, checked the fold, then ran his thumb along the burgundy border. These are better than the last batch Frank did. Ruth did not know where to put that sentence, so she put it nowhere. Paul carried the boxes inside. In the quiet foyer, Evelyn's silver-haired sister approached, dressed in navy with red lipstick. She took a card from Paul and looked at the photograph for a long moment. She hated that picture, the woman said. Ruth's stomach dropped. Which is why it's perfect. The woman touched Evelyn's printed cheek. She spent 20 years insisting she looked smug. She did look a little smug, Ruth said. She had reason. The woman thanked her and returned to the visitation room. There was no applause, no relief large enough to erase the unpaid bills. Just 200 cards on a table where they were needed. Ruth found that was enough to get her back into Jean's car. Her Buick was still at the house on Oak Ridge Avenue. When she pulled into the driveway, Daniel's inherited green pickup was parked across the garage, the walnut desk secured in its bed beneath a blue tarp. Apparently it had spent the night there after refusing to fit in the SUV. The estate crew carried boxes through the front door. Each box bore a colored sticker, blue for Daniel, pink for Claire, white for sale. Ruth's things had no color. Claire had left a stack of grocery cartons beside the staircase with Ruth written across them in the black marker. Claire came out of the dining room holding 2 silver candlesticks. "You look exhausted," she said. "I am. Did you sleep at all?" "Some." "You shouldn't be driving. I borrowed Jean's car because mine is trapped." Claire looked toward the van as though the van had made a personal error. "I'll have them move." She set the candlesticks into a pink stickered box, then brushed at the knees of her cream trousers. At 45, Claire had Frank's dark eyebrows and her mother's deliberate grace. Even carrying silver, she looked as if she had just stepped away from a meeting where water came in glass bottles. "The prints cleaned up beautifully," she said. "Vinegar worked." "Good. I'm putting them in my office. Not all of them. Maybe 4. "Good." Claire's mouth tightened. Ruth had answered correctly, but not warmly enough. "We kept the landscape from the upstairs hall for you," she said. "Daniel thought you liked it." Ruth had never liked the landscape. It showed a muddy field under a yellow sky and had come with the house. "Thank you. And obviously anything personal is yours. Clothes, photographs of you and Dad, your kitchen things." "My kitchen things? You know what I mean." Ruth did. The red Dutch oven she had bought before she met Frank was hers. The cast iron skillet his mother gave them was family. The good knives were disputed because Ruth used them, but Frank had ordered them. Grief had turned the kitchen into customs control. Daniel entered from the garage carrying a roll of packing tape around his wrist. "There you are. We need your decision on the basement freezer." "I don't want it." "Great." "Sale." He wrote on a clipboard. He wore an old Mercer print jacket, navy canvas with the shop's name embroidered above the pocket. Ruth had ordered those jackets during a profitable winter. Daniel had complained his was too stiff and left it in the hall closet for 9 years. "Desk doesn't fit through Claire's office door," he said. Claire closed her eyes. "We'll deal with it. Need to take the legs off." "Ruth, you know if those are bolted?" "Wood screws." Frank reinforced the left rear one with a metal bracket. Daniel looked pleased. "Knew you'd remember." His satisfaction was so ordinary it nearly undid her. For 1 second they were simply 3 people who knew the same difficult man and the peculiarities of his furniture. Then he looked at her blouse. "You came from the shop?" "We finished the Dempsey order. I thought you were closing." "I am." "When?" "When the work is finished." Daniel's expression shifted into the patience he used with slow waiters. "There's always going to be work. There are 21 more orders with deposits. Refund them? With what?" He stopped. Claire put the candlesticks down. "The business doesn't have the money. The business has spent the money. How much?" "I'm still calculating." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Dad said the shop was stable. Dad said a lot of things." The words came out harder than Ruth intended. Claire's face changed, not in defense of Frank, but in fear of what else Ruth might say. Daniel lowered his voice. "You have options. Sell the equipment. Clear the accounts. You don't need to prove anything. I'm delivering work people paid for. You're 68, Ruth. You worked your whole life. Take your Social Security. Get a nice condo. Travel with one of those senior groups." She almost laughed. Daniel had inherited the cabin and was advising her to travel. "Thank you," she said. "I hadn't considered becoming a brochure." Claire gave him a warning look. "I'm trying to help," he said. "You're wearing the help." Daniel glanced down at Frank's shop jacket. "This? It was in the closet." "I know where it was." He unzipped it as if suddenly too warm. For a moment, Ruth thought he might hand it to her. Instead, he draped it over the banister. Claire followed Ruth upstairs. The bedroom had been half dismantled. Frank's clothes were gone from the closet, but his smell remained. Cedar blocks, shaving cream, the faint medicinal sweetness of the lotion Ruth rubbed into his swollen legs. Her own dresses hung alone, crowded to one side, though there was no longer any need. Claire stood in the doorway. "Daniel gets blunt when he's worried. Daniel gets blunt when he's awake. He thinks you'll drain your savings. So do I." Claire blinked. "Then why?" Ruth opened a dresser drawer and began placing folded sweaters into a grocery carton. "I don't know yet. That's not like you." "No, it's very much like your father." Claire leaned against the frame. "Dad believed the shop would support you. Your father believed customers paid for optimism. He wouldn't deliberately leave you with a mess." Ruth fitted another sweater into the box. "He deliberately left me out of knowing about it." Claire had no quick answer to that. Downstairs, packing tape ripped from its roll. A chair scraped. The house sounded busy and indifferent. like a restaurant after closing. I can talk to Daniel, Claire said finally. About what? The building. If you need a few months without rent? Ruth stopped folding. Mercer Print had never paid market rent because Frank owned the building through the same family trust that now belonged to Daniel and Claire. It had paid taxes, insurance, and repairs, moving money from one Mercer pocket to another. Ruth had not yet allowed herself to think about what happened when the new pockets wanted cash. I'll pay what we owe, she said. That isn't what I meant. I know. Claire reached for a sweater, thought better of it, and smoothed the empty side of the bed instead. You make it very hard to do anything for you. Ruth looked at her. You took my dining table yesterday. It was Mom's. I know whose it was. Claire's hand went still. Ruth closed the box. She did not apologize, and Claire did not leave. For several minutes they packed in silence, one woman folding and the other holding open cartons she had labeled. By the time Ruth returned to the shop, Jean had unlocked the front door and arranged the 21 remaining envelopes in order by promised date. Louise stood at the cutter with the North County Recovery Alliance booklet spread before him. A woman in a raincoat waited at the counter. She had cropped gray hair, a messenger bag, and both hands pressed flat against Frank's yellow receipt. I'm Marlene Booker, she said. Frank took $2,600 from our organization. Ruth set down her handbag. Marlene pushed the receipt toward her. I don't want another excuse. I want 800 booklets by Friday, or I want every dollar back. Behind Ruth, the copier gave a warning beep. Ruth looked at the 48 pages laid out on the cutter bed, then at Louise. He shook his head once. Not Friday. Ruth turned back to Marlene. You won't have them Friday, she said, but you will get the truth today. Marlene Booker studied Ruth's face as if truth were a material she had been sold before and found defective. What does that mean? It means Frank promised a date this shop cannot meet. He promised it in writing. I can see that. And he took our deposit. I can see that too. Marlene drew the receipt back toward herself. Then give me a check. Ruth did not look at John. She did not look at Louise. The money isn't in the account. Silence moved through the shop, swallowing even the copier's beeping. Marlene's expression emptied. Excuse me? The business used your deposit for operating expenses. Paper, payroll, utilities. I'm still determining exactly what happened and when. You're telling me he stole from us? No, you just told me he spent money for work he didn't do. I'm telling you the condition of the business. I'm not choosing a more dramatic word because you're angry. Marlene stepped closer to the counter. She was not tall, but she knew how to occupy a room. We're a non-profit. That deposit came from people who sell spaghetti dinners and put $5 bills in envelopes. We're running peer training in 12 days. Those are the workbooks. Ruth's stomach tightened. 12 days? Frank knew the date. The job envelope said Friday in thick black marker. It did not say why. Ruth motioned toward the production floor. Would you come back here? Marlene hesitated, then followed her to the cutter. Louise had laid out a sample booklet made from the supplied digital file. 48 pages meant 12 double-sided sheets, collated, folded, and stapled through the spine. Frank's estimate assumed paper at last year's price and left almost nothing for labor. This is your file? Ruth asked. Marlene picked up the sample. Yes. Any changes? We corrected 2 phone numbers and emailed the final version 3 weeks ago. John was already searching Frank's computer. Louise said, we can produce 200 by Friday if nothing else breaks. The remaining 600 in another week. Marlene looked at him. Frank said all 800. I'm not Frank. No, apparently you're the person who knows how long it takes. Louise glanced at Ruth, unsure whether that was criticism. Ruth was not sure either. How much paper do we have? She asked. Enough for maybe 300 counting waste. What will the rest cost? Louise gave her a number. Ruth wrote it on the back of an outdated hospital system envelope. Then she added toner, staples, and 2 hours of machine time she knew they would actually need. The total consumed nearly all the money left after Friday's payroll. Marlene watched her calculate. If I agree to this, how do I know you won't close next week? You don't. Not very comforting. I'm fresh out of comforting lies. Jean found the corrected file. Frank had downloaded it, but never opened it. She turned the screen so Marlene could see the date. Ruth took a breath. 200 Friday. 600 by next Friday. No additional charge, though there should be one. If we miss either date, I'll give you our equipment sales schedule as soon as it exists, and your organization will be listed among the first refunds. Listed where? In an agreement I'll sign. Marlene's mouth twisted. You just said you don't have the money. I don't. A signed promise won't change that. It will tell you exactly where you stand. That's a low bar. It's the bar I have. Marlene looked down at the sample booklet. The cover showed two hands holding the same length of rope, one on either side of a knot. Underneath, in blue type, were the words, "Staying when it gets hard." The title seemed rude under the circumstances. I want 250 Friday, Marlene said. 200, 225. Luis opened his mouth. 225, Ruth agreed. He shut it again. And I want to inspect them before we pick them up. You should. Marlene slipped the sample into her messenger bag. At the door, she turned back. I liked your husband. So did I, Ruth said. Marlene's anger faltered for half a second, confused by the answer. Then she left. Luis waited until the bell stopped moving. 225? You said maybe 300. I said we have paper for maybe 300. That includes setup waste. How many can you guarantee? 200. Then we'll waste less. He stared at her. Ruth stared back. Jean came between them carrying a yellow pad. While you two decide who has the stronger jaw, Sorrento's called. He needs his temporary inserts by 5. The inserts were simple black type on cream stock. They should have taken 40 minutes. The first proof showed the old price for veal marsala. The corrected file changed the price but dropped the word marsala. The third had a smear across the bottom because Luis had cleaned the press too quickly between inks. At 4:10, Ruth drove the finished inserts to Sorrento's in her Buick, which the estate crew had finally freed. The restaurant owner, Carlos Sorrento, stood behind the bar holding one sheet at arm's length. You made the calamari $9. That's what your email says. It's 14. Then your email is wrong. My email cannot be wrong. I dictated it to my sister. Your sister can be wrong. He stared at her over the top of the insert. Ruth was too tired to fear losing a customer they were planning to abandon anyway. Carlo lowered the paper. She can be wrong. He brought out a red pen. Together they checked every price while the dining room staff set tables around them. Carlo corrected 4 numbers and changed the spelling of puttanesca twice before changing it back. Frank used to know what I meant, he said. Frank used to guess. He was good at guessing. He gave you away 50 inserts because the menus are late. Carlo looked offended. He offered. They cost money. Everything costs money. Now we agree. He clicked the pen closed. You are not as friendly as Frank? No. But maybe I get the right calamari price. Monday. He poured her a small glass of red wine. Ruth refused it because she was driving. He poured it into a coffee cup with a plastic lid and told her to drive home before drinking it. At the shop, the Recovery Alliance job occupied every available surface. Jean collated stacks by hand while Luis coaxed the copier through a jam. Ruth set the coffee cup near the sink. Dinner? Jean asked. Wine. Better. Luis pulled a wrinkled sheet from the machine. You told Marlene she could inspect Friday. Yes, we're already behind. Then why are we talking? His head appeared above the copier door. You know, Frank used to say that. Then let's retire the phrase. They worked until 10. Ruth called customers between stacks. The Historical Society accepted a later date after Ruth explained the hardcover binding would be outsourced. The waterproof label customer wanted an immediate refund and became loud enough that Jean could hear him from 6 feet away. Ruth wrote his amount on a sheet titled Refunds Owed and gave him no date she could not keep. The man whose business cards had nearly lost an N was delighted anyone had called. He had forgotten he ordered them. Can I cancel? He asked. Yes. Do I get my deposit back? Yes. When? Ruth closed her eyes. Within 6 weeks. Oh, then maybe just print the cards. By Wednesday, Mercer Print had completed 4 small orders and discovered 6 more problems. The copier began leaving faint yellow clouds on white backgrounds. The folder developed a squeal John described as accusatory. Allegheny Paper refused further deliveries without payment on the overdue account. Ruth drove to the supplier's warehouse with a check for $3,000. The clerk behind the glass partition took it, typed for a moment, and shook her head. That doesn't release the hold. It's a third of the balance. Company policy is 50%. I need stock for an order whose deposit my company already spent. The clerk's expression said she had heard more inventive tragedies before lunch. Ruth asked for the credit manager and sat beneath a rack of paper samples for 40 minutes. When he finally appeared, he was a narrow man named Ed Halpern, who had known Frank for 20 years. "Sorry about Frank," he said. "Thank you. He was a character. That's becoming expensive to hear." Ed almost smiled. Ruth showed him the Recovery Alliance job ticket, their production schedule, and the check. He did not forgive the balance. He did agree to release exactly the paper needed for the 600 remaining booklets, plus 1 carton of cream cover if Mercer Print paid cash for the new stock. "Frank told me Bollinger was coming back," he said, while signing the release. "He told me they were renegotiating." They weren't. "I know that now." Ed capped his pen. "You closing the place?" "Yes." "Then why finish all this?" Ruth thought of Evelyn Shaw's sister touching the printed photograph. She thought of Marlene saying spaghetti dinners. "Because the customers didn't make Frank sick," she said. "They shouldn't have to pay for it." Ed studied her for a moment, then added 1 extra ream to the release sheet. "It was damaged," he said. The wrapping had a small tear at one corner. Ruth did not thank him too warmly. People sometimes withdrew kindness if it became visible. Marlene arrived Friday at 4 wearing the same raincoat, though the day was clear. 225 workbooks sat in neat boxes on the counter. Luis had produced exactly 11 extra, then hidden his satisfaction under complaints about the staple heads. Marlene opened 3 boxes at random. She checked page order, print clarity, and the center staples. On the last booklet, she stopped. Ruth's breath caught. Marlene held it out. "Page 31 is upside down." Luis took it from her. He flipped through the booklet, jaw tightening. Ruth opened another from the same box. Page 31 was correct. They checked the rest of the stack and found 1 more error. 2, Luis said, out of 236. "We promised 225 good ones," Ruth said. He looked at her. Marlene looked between them. "You two always like this?" "We've had an intense week," Jean said. They replaced the faulty booklets from the extras. Marlene counted the boxes again, then reached into her messenger bag. "I brought something." Ruth braced for another correction. Marlene placed a check on the counter for $400. "What's this?" Ruth asked. "The board approved the difference between Frank's estimate and the paper. Cost you showed me. You don't owe that." "No, we don't. I told you no additional charge. And I didn't agree. I agreed not to sue you this week." Luis turned away, but Ruth saw the smile. Marlene slid the check closer. "We need the other 600. You need enough money to make them. Don't make this sentimental." Ruth picked up the check. "I wouldn't dare," she said. After Marlene left, Jean opened the front door to let out the heat from the copier. Evening traffic moved along Main Street, tires whispering over old rainwater. Luis stacked the rejected booklets on the cutter. "We can reuse the clean sheets for setup." Ruth nodded. He picked up the one with the upside-down page and tapped its crooked spine against the table. "You were right to tell her 225, he said. Ruth looked over. "I could do it," he added. "I just didn't know if the machines could." That sounds like something Frank would say. "Take it back." Immediately. Jean brought the mail from the box beside the front door. Utility bill, copier invoice, 2 condolence cards, a white business envelope addressed to Mercer Print letterpress. Attention, Ruth Mercer. The return address belonged to Mercer Property Holdings. Ruth opened it with Frank's sharpened pencil. Inside was the first rent statement Daniel and Claire had ever sent the shop. The amount due was $3,000. Ruth read it twice, then handed the statement to John. Jean read it once. "That's bold." Luis took it from her. "That's murder," with a letterhead. The statement covered the coming month and listed the building's square footage, utilities excluded. Payment was due on the 1st. At the bottom, in a box labeled Notes, someone had typed, "Please contact management regarding a month-to-month occupancy agreement." Management, Jean said. Daniel got promoted fast. Ruth folded the paper along its existing creases. "What did the shop pay before?" Luis asked. "Taxes, insurance, repairs. Around $1,100 a month if you averaged it. So they tripled it. They're charging rent instead of carrying expenses. Is 3,000 market?" Ruth looked through the window at the row of narrow brick buildings along Main Street. One had been empty since a dentist retired. Another housed a furniture consignment store that seemed to hold a closing sale every season. "I don't know. She did know Mercer Print could not pay it. The $400 check from Marlene lay on the counter, more generous than it had any right to be. Ruth slid it beneath the cash drawer tray, where checks waited for deposit. Luis put the rent statement down. You want me to stay while you call him? No. You want me to unplug anything? That offer is becoming less funny. It wasn't an offer, just checking your boundaries. Ruth waited until both of them left. Then she dialed Daniel at the folding table in Frank's empty office. He answered on the fourth ring. Hey Ruth, everything okay? I got your rent statement. A pause. Right, I was going to call. Before or after the first. It's just to formalize things. $3,000 formalizes them quite a bit. That's below market for 6,000 square feet downtown. Half the building is storage and a loading bay. Usable commercial space. The roof leaks above the sink. We can address maintenance under the new lease. There is no new lease. You sent a month-to-month agreement. Another pause, shorter this time. Ruth could hear him moving, then the soft thump of a car door. He had stepped away from someone. Look, he said, Claire and I have carrying costs. Property tax, insurance. The shop paid those. Dad paid those through the shop. It's different now. I understand that, do you? The question came out before he could make it polite. Ruth held Frank's pencil between her fingers, one of its carved edges pressed into her thumb. I understand you inherited a building you don't want to subsidize, she said. Do you understand I inherited a business that can't pay what you're asking? I told you to sell the equipment, and I told you people are owed work. You're choosing to keep operating for 6 weeks. Then this is operating expense. Ruth looked at the pale marks in the carpet where the desk had stood. Did Claire agree to this? Claire agrees we need things in writing. That wasn't my question. Daniel sighed. She thought we could waive the first month. But you didn't. We already gave you the house rent-free for years. The sentence landed so cleanly that Ruth wondered whether he had prepared it. She had paid for groceries, repairs, utilities, property taxes whenever Frank's shop account ran short, and the nurse who came twice a week near the end. She had cooked in the house, cleaned it, replaced its water heater, and slept beside his father in it. Daniel had converted all of that into free rent. Ruth set down the pencil. Send me the occupancy agreement, she said. Ruth, I'll have an answer Monday. She ended the call. For several minutes she sat without moving. Anger would have been easier if Daniel were entirely wrong. The building was his and Claire's now. They had expenses. Frank had designed a life where every boundary remained soft until his absence hardened all of them at once. Ruth took the rent statement home to the apartment above the pharmacy. The space had one bedroom, a galley kitchen, and windows that looked across the alley at the back of a bank. Her boxes filled the living room. The landscape Claire had saved for her leaned against the wall, its yellow sky accusing the couch. She opened a carton marked kitchen and found Frank's electric carving knife. Ruth stared at it. The carving knife had belonged to Frank before their marriage, which should have made it family under Claire's system. Apparently nobody considered it valuable enough to inherit. She placed it in a box for the charity shop. The door buzzer sounded. Claire stood downstairs with 2 grocery bags and Frank's Mercer print jacket folded over one arm. I brought dinner, she said, when Ruth let her in. Daniel told me you called. Did he tell you he reminded me I lived rent-free? Claire's eyes closed briefly. He told me the conversation went badly. He summarized in his favor. I didn't know he sent the statement. You agreed things should be in writing. I agreed we needed an occupancy agreement if the shop stayed open. I didn't agree to $3,000 next month. Ruth took one grocery bag. It contained soup, bread, salad, and a bottle of wine, more expensive than anything she bought for herself. Are these a rent rebate? They're dinner. I already have wine in a coffee cup. Claire looked at her. Long story. They unpacked the food. Claire hung Frank's jacket over the back of a chair. Daniel didn't want it? Ruth asked. He said you made a point about it. I made a rude comment. He felt rude wearing it. That surprised her. Daniel was capable of embarrassment then. He had simply learned to process it somewhere private. Claire glanced around the apartment. This is nice. It's small. Small can be nice. People with large houses say that. Claire opened the wine. You're in a mood? I worked until midnight, argued with a customer, finished 225 booklets, and received a bill from my stepchildren for the privilege. You said you were closing, so everyone keeps reminding me. They ate soup at the narrow counter because the table was buried behind boxes. Claire removed her jacket, revealing a soft green blouse Ruth recognized from photographs advertising Claire's skincare company. Claire had built the business from one rented treatment room into 3 boutiques. She worked hard. Ruth had never denied it, though Claire sometimes behaved as if acknowledging anyone else's work would dilute her own. Could the shop pay $1,500? Claire asked. No. $1,000? Not this month. What can it pay? Ruth spooned broth around a piece of potato. Nothing without taking new work. Then take new work. We're closing. Then sell. Ruth set down her spoon. Do you hear yourself? Claire pressed her lips together. You tell me to finish. You tell me to stop. You tell me to take work and sell the machines in the same breath. I'm trying to find something that doesn't end with you broke. I'd settle for something that ends with everyone leaving me alone long enough to think. Claire looked toward the boxes. The apartment refrigerator hummed. After a moment, she said, I told Daniel to waive the first month. I'll make sure he does. I don't want your half of a favor while he keeps a list. It's not a favor. What is it? Claire had no answer that did not sound like one. She left the jacket and the wine. At the door, she turned back. Dad printed everything for me, she said. Labels, appointment cards, gift certificates. He never charged. I know. I thought it didn't cost him much. I know that too. Claire's face tightened. You don't have to say it that way. I'm not sure what way you'd like. The downstairs buzzer rang after Claire had been gone 10 minutes. Ruth expected she had forgotten her keys. Instead, Naomi Price stood on the sidewalk holding a thick folder. I know it's late, Naomi said, but you told me 6 weeks. That wasn't an invitation. It was a countdown. Upstairs, Naomi spread paper samples across the buried table. A small coffee roaster was changing its packaging and needed 800 wraparound labels in 4 varieties. Naomi's copy center could print them, but could not score the heavy stock cleanly. You have the Heidelberg, she said. The Heidelberg is not for hire. Everything is for hire when rent arrives. Ruth gave her a sharp look. Main Street talks, Naomi said. Also, Daniel asked my landlord what I pay per square foot. That sat badly. Naomi tapped the estimate. I supply printed sheets. Luis runs the score and die cut. You charge me machine time and labor. No materials, no waiting for customers to approve colors, no collection risk. We're finishing old orders. You're allowed to earn money while doing penance. It isn't penance. What is it? Ruth thought of the 21 envelopes and Frank's turned handwriting. Cleanup. Naomi gathered the paper samples. $300 for 6 hours. I can take it elsewhere, but their schedule is 2 weeks. Mine is 4 days. Luis decides if the press can do it. Naomi stopped gathering. That isn't a yes, Ruth said. It sounds dangerously close. The next morning, Luis examined the sample stock, measured the score placement, and inspected Naomi's cutting die. He asked 6 questions Ruth did not understand and 2 Naomi had not considered. It'll take 8 hours, he said. Naomi folded her arms. 6. 8 if you want the fold straight. They're coffee labels, not surgical equipment. Then fold them with your hands. They settled on 7 hours and $350. Naomi paid half before leaving. Ruth watched Jean write a fresh job envelope. The yellow paper looked identical to all of Frank's, but Jean printed the price, deadline, material responsibility, and deposit amount in careful block letters. At the bottom, she added, No verbal changes. Luis read it. You putting that on everything? Everything except my will. Ruth looked from the new envelope to the old one spread across the order table. New money would help them complete work already owed. It could also become another deposit spent before its promise was kept. Naomi's job does not enter production until the recovery booklets are on schedule, she said. Luis nodded. We don't accept anything we can't cost properly. Materials plus labor, in writing, Jean wrote as Ruth spoke, and no family work without an invoice. Jean underlined that one. The front bell rang. Carlos Sorrento entered carrying the temporary menu insert, marked in red again. I have one tiny correction, he announced. Ruth looked at the page. Red ink covered half of it. No, she said. Carlo blinked. No. Those are new menus. New price, new deadline, 50% deposit. His eyebrows rose. Ruth waited for him to walk out. Instead, Carlo slowly smiled. Now you sound like a printer, he said. He took out his checkbook. Carlo wrote the check while standing at the counter, pausing after every line, as if Ruth might weaken and lower the price. "To Mercer Print?" he asked. "That's usually how checks work. You are very sharp in the morning. It's nearly noon. This is morning in restaurants." He tore out the check and held it down with 2 fingers. 300 menus, heavy cover, no fingerprints. "We do not provide fingerprints." Frank did. "Those were free." Carlo laughed and released the check. Gene made a new envelope, attached his marked sheet, and stamped the deposit date at the top. Ruth checked the amount before placing it under the cash tray beside Naomi's. 2 new jobs had entered the shop with enough money to complete themselves. The fact felt so unfamiliar that Ruth distrusted it. Louise spent the afternoon producing the remaining Recovery Alliance booklets. The shop's rhythm changed when he was allowed to set it. He grouped tasks by paper stock, ran covers while the copier cooled, and refused to interrupt a long print cycle when the real estate agent arrived demanding listing sheets immediately. "Frank always put me first," the agent said. Louise looked through the production window at Ruth. She stepped to the counter. "Frank put everybody first. That's part of the problem." The agent left with a Tuesday deadline and an estimate 30% higher than the one in his hand. "He'll go somewhere else," Jean said after the door closed. "Then he'll be somewhere else." Jean studied her. "We should put that on a sign. They did not lose him." He called 20 minutes later and ordered half the quantity. The 600 booklets were finished a day ahead of Ruth's revised promise. They occupied 14 boxes stacked 2 high, each marked with the page count and quantity. Louise inspected samples from every box. Jean insisted on opening 3 at random because Marlene had trained her to expect an ambush from page 31. Marlene arrived with a hand truck and no raincoat. "You're early," she said. "You sound disappointed. I had a speech ready. You can save it for another printer." Marlene checked 5 booklets anyway. Then she loaded the boxes while Louise steadied the stack. At the door, she turned to Ruth. "Our board uses programs for 3 events a year. We're closing. I didn't ask. You were about to. I was going to say that if you're still here in October, call me." Ruth looked at the clean blue covers waiting inside the open boxes. "All right." Marlene narrowed her eyes. "That was suspiciously easy. I'm tired." "Good. You're more reasonable tired." After she left, Jean crossed the Recovery Alliance job off the wall calendar with a thick green marker. The line went through Frank's original due date and ended at Ruth's. 1 large obligation gone. 17 remained. The shop had earned almost nothing from the workbooks, but it had not lost as much as Ruth feared. Careful setup reduced the wasted paper. Louise finished in fewer machine hours than his estimate. Marlene's extra check covered toner, and the balance went toward Allegheny paper. Ruth paid John and Louise on Friday, then herself, nothing. She drove home with the pay stubs in her handbag and Frank's jacket on the passenger seat. Claire had left it at the apartment, but Ruth brought it to the shop because that was where it belonged. She had not worn it. The shoulders were too broad, and the cuffs carried old crescents of black ink that no washing had removed. At a red light, she reached over and touched the embroidered name. Mercer Print Letterpress. No Frank, no Ruth. Just Mercer, a word that had become a building, a business, a family, and a bill, depending on who said it. Her phone rang as she pulled into the pharmacy lot. Daniel's name lit the screen. "I sent the revised agreement," he said when she answered. "I'm driving. You answered. I'm parked now. Claire and I waived the coming month. After that, $1,800 monthly. That barely covers our costs." "For how long?" "It's month to month. That tells me how the paperwork renews." I asked how long I can stay. Daniel exhaled. "We want to show the space. To tenants. To anyone interested. While we're operating. With notice." Ruth watched a pharmacy employee break down cartons beside the dumpster. The apartment above her had 1 lit window. She had left the kitchen light on again. "You said 6 weeks, Daniel continued. "We're giving you the 6 weeks. And after that? If you close, we market an empty building. If you don't, we discuss it. 3,000 was a discussion. That was market rent. You reduced the market quickly. Claire wanted to. There it was. The favor assigned to Claire so Daniel could remain a businessman. Ruth rubbed the indentation Frank's pencil had left in her thumb. She had begun carrying it everywhere, not from tenderness, but because nobody in the shop could find a pencil when needed. "I'll read the agreement," she said. "Please don't wait until the last minute." She nearly asked him whether he meant the way his father had. Instead, she told him good night. The agreement waited in her email. 2 pages, plain enough. No trap, no grand scheme. The owners could show the property with 24 hours notice. Either side could end occupancy with 30 days notice. Ruth would remain responsible for utilities and damage. Rent waived for 1 month, $1,800 thereafter. At the bottom were signature lines for Daniel, Claire, and Ruth. Claire had already signed. Ruth printed it at the pharmacy the next morning because she refused to use shop toner on family paperwork. She signed at the counter between a display of cough drops and a blood pressure machine. The pharmacist served as witness and asked if she wanted the pages stapled. "No," Ruth said, "I've got staples." At the shop, Naomi's coffee labels were running on the Heidelberg. The press filled the production room with a mechanical clatter that Ruth felt through the soles of her shoes. Louis stood beside it, feeding printed sheets, one hand moving in a calm, repeated arc. His attention made the old machine seem less temperamental than exacting. Ruth watched a finished sheet land in the delivery tray. 4 rust-colored labels crossed the page, each scored precisely where the wrap would fold around a coffee bag. "The score is off," Naomi said. "It is not," Louis replied. "It looks off." Louis stopped the press. The sudden silence rang. He lifted a sheet, folded the label along both lines, and formed it around the sample bag. The edges met cleanly at the back. Naomi turned it in her hands. "I was looking at the wrong mark. Yes, you could be nicer about that. I could charge for it." Ruth looked at the clock. "How many?" 180 sheets left," Louise said. "Will you finish within 7 hours?" "Yes." "Then restart before it cools." Naomi raised an eyebrow as the press began clattering again. "You sure you're closing?" "Yes." "You keep saying it faster. I'm practicing." Naomi paid the remaining balance when she collected the labels. The following morning, she sent the coffee roaster to Mercer Print for menu cards and tasting notes. Paul Dempsey ordered another set of memorial cards. Carlo approved his corrected menu proof, with only one argument over apostrophes. New envelopes appeared beside old ones. Ruth allowed 3 rules. They accepted no job without a written price. Deposits had to cover materials. Luis had final authority over production time, though John had final authority over whether his estimates included eating and basic human movement. "You can't schedule a 12-hour run and call it 1 day," she told him. "It occurs within a day. So does sleep." "Not here." "Exactly." The rules did not make the business healthy. The copier lease remained too high. The hospital and Bollinger accounts left holes no coffee labels could fill. Every dollar entered already carrying several destinations. But the lights stayed on. Claire arrived on a Wednesday carrying a glossy white shopping bag with pale green handles. She set it on the counter and removed a box of skincare serum. The packaging showed a watercolor leaf above the words Claire Mercer Botanicals. "New line?" Ruth asked. "Rebrand. We're launching across all 3 locations next month." The box was elegant and expensive. Ruth turned it over. The ingredients were printed in type so small she needed Jean's glasses. "I need sleeves for the gift sets," Claire said. "Heavy cream stock, soft green ink, maybe embossed." "How many?" 1,500 to start. "When?" 10 days. Ruth looked up. "No." Claire laughed as if Ruth had made a familiar joke, then realized she had not. "Too fast?" "For embossing, yes. We don't do it here. The trade finisher needs at least 2 weeks after proof approval. Dad always got them done. Frank sent them out." "Fine. Send them out." Ruth brought the bag to the order table. "John can write specifications. Luis will need a physical sample of the gift box. I brought one in the car. We'll quote tomorrow." Claire shifted her purse higher on her shoulder. "Great. And we'll need a 50% deposit before ordering stock." The pleased efficiency went out of Claire's face. "Ruth, it's me. I recognized you. I'm not some walk-in customer." "No? A walk-in customer wouldn't know Frank printed your work free." Claire glanced toward the production room. Luis was close enough to hear, which made Ruth regret the sentence without making it false. "I offered to pay," Claire said. "When?" "Plenty of times." "And when he waved you off? What was I supposed to do? Force cash into his hand?" "You could have asked how he paid for the paper." Claire's cheeks colored. "This is about the rent. This is about 1,500 sleeves. I got Daniel to lower it. You got him to charge 1,800 for a building the shop maintained for decades. I got him to waive a month because you said 6 weeks. I have defended you every time he says you're dragging this out." Ruth felt Jean become very still at the order computer. "I didn't ask you to defend me. No, you don't ask anyone for anything. You just make sure they feel ashamed when they don't guess. The words struck close enough that Ruth's first answer died before she spoke it. Claire reached for the serum box. Ruth kept one hand on it. If you want a quote, Ruth said, leave the sample. Claire pulled the box free. I can get this printed elsewhere. You can. Dad would have done it. Dad did a lot of work he couldn't afford. Claire placed the serum back into the glossy bag. For a moment, hurt made her look much younger, though not innocent. I thought maybe this could help you, she said. It could, at the correct price. I hope the correct price keeps you warm. She walked out, the brass bell jingling above her. Jean waited until Claire's car pulled away. That went well, she said. Ruth picked up the specification sheet Claire had left behind. At the top, beneath the pale green logo, was a launch date 11 days away. No, Ruth said. It went honestly. But when she carried the sheet to the folding table, her hands were shaking. Luis waited until Ruth set the specification sheet down. You charged her for Frank, he said. Ruth looked at him. I didn't charge her anything. That's my point. Jean suddenly became interested in aligning a stack that was already aligned. She wanted 1,500 custom sleeves in 10 days, Ruth said, with embossing. Bad job. Impossible job. Then you could have said that. I did. You said other things too. Ruth folded the specification sheet once. Is there a production matter you need to discuss? No. Then this is none of your business. Luis gave a short nod. That sounded like Frank too. He returned to the press room. June took off her glasses. I'm going to pretend I have an errand. Do you? I do now. The front bell closed behind her. Ruth sat at the folding table, holding Claire's launch sheet between both hands. Luis was wrong in one way. The price had not been about Frank, not entirely. It had been about Claire packing silver into pink stickered boxes while Ruth carried sweaters into grocery cartons. It had been about dinner served as kindness after a rent statement. It had been about every free label Frank printed while telling Ruth the shop could not afford to pay her bookkeeping invoice that month. The sleeves were only sleeves. Ruth had made them answer for everything. That did not mean Claire should receive them free. It meant the truth could be used as a weapon, as easily as a lie. Jean returned with 3 iced teas and no explanation of where she had gone. She placed one beside Ruth and one at Luis's station. Nobody apologized. Work resumed around the silence. The Historical Society agreed to soft-cover binding rather than wait for hardcovers. Naomi found a binder 40 miles away who could finish the job if Mercer Print delivered folded signatures by Thursday. Ruth repriced the work at cost. The Society's treasurer complained that Frank had promised linen covers, then admitted no one on the committee remembered choosing linen. Paul Dempsey ordered memorial cards for a retired barber and paid the new rate without comment. Carlo's menus came off the press, heavy, clean, and apostrophically correct. He inspected every page, kissed his fingertips, and told Ruth the cream stock was too cream. You approved it, she said. I approve many things I later question. Your check cleared. Then it is beautiful. Old envelopes disappeared from the order wall. New ones appeared, fewer but healthier. Jean drew a black line down the middle of the calendar and labeled one side Oyed and the other earned. Ruth objected to the word. We earn the owed work too, she said. Spiritually, John replied, not financially. Daniel brought 2 prospective tenants through on a Tuesday afternoon. He had given 24 hours notice, exactly as the agreement required. One man represented a physical therapy practice. The other wore loafers without socks and kept photographing electrical outlets. They walked around the operating Heidelberg while Luis watched them with the expression of a guard dog evaluating burglars. How soon can this equipment be removed? The sockless man asked. 6 weeks, Daniel said. Ruth, standing behind him, said, That depends on the equipment. Daniel looked over his shoulder. You said 6 weeks. I said 6 weeks to finish the owed jobs. And then you close. That was the plan. Was? The physical therapy representative stepped away, suddenly fascinated by the ceiling height. Ruth had not meant to change the tense. The word had come out on its own. We're working, she said. Please stay clear of marked areas. Daniel finished the tour with his jaw set. Outside, she saw him speaking sharply into his phone. Claire's name appeared on the screen before he turned away. Claire did not call Ruth. 3 days later, she came into the shop carrying a crushed white carton. She wore black trousers and a silk blouse with one cuff unbuttoned. Her hair, normally smooth, had been pulled into a loose knot. She placed the carton on the counter and opened it. Pale green sleeves lay inside. The color leaned toward mint, nothing like the muted leaf green on Claire's serum boxes. White cracks ran along every fold. On several, the glued seam had already opened. Ruth lifted one. The stock was coated, thick and cut against the grain. When did these arrive? This morning. From where? A printer in New Jersey. When did you approve the proof? The digital proof looked fine. A screen can't show a fold. I know that now. Luis came to the counter, picked up a sleeve, and bent it. The coating broke with a faint dry snap. Wrong stock, he said. The printer says it's within industry tolerance. For kindling. Claire closed her eyes. My launch dinner is Saturday. It was Thursday afternoon. How many sets for the dinner? Ruth asked. 200? The rest go to the boutiques Monday. We can't produce 1,500 by Monday. I'm not asking for 1,500, Ruth waited. I'm asking what you can do, Claire said. It was the first time Ruth remembered hearing her ask the question that way. Luis examined the serum box Claire had brought this time. He measured its width, then sketched a flat band on the back of a spoiled menu proof. No embossing, he said. One color ink. We can make a wrap with a locking tab instead of glue. Will it look cheap? Claire asked. Yes, he said. Ruth looked at him. What? Everything looks cheap to somebody. He drew a narrow border around the sketch. Use the cream stock from the Shaw cards. Mix the green by eye. It'll look intentional. How many? Ruth asked. 240 by Saturday if we run after the historical pages. Not before? Those signatures leave for the binder tomorrow at 3. Claire gripped the edge of the counter. My dinner does not move ahead of work already promised, Ruth said. I wasn't asking you to do that. You were about to. Claire's face hardened, then settled. What time Saturday? Noon, Louise said. Ruth calculated paper, ink, press time, cutting, scoring, and the hours they would lose to a rush setup. She added 30%. Claire read the total. That's more per sleeve than the embossed order. It's a short emergency run, I know, 50% now, balance before pickup, I know. Claire took out her checkbook. Ruth felt no triumph. The absence of it surprised her. The Historical Society pages ran until nearly 2 Friday afternoon. Naomi arrived with her van and helped Luis load the folded signatures. When the last carton left, he cleaned the ink train and began mixing Claire's green. Claire stayed. Ruth had assumed she would return Saturday, but at 6, she came through the production door wearing jeans and carrying sandwiches. She had tied her hair back with a green scarf almost identical to the color she wanted. You don't have to be here, Ruth said. I want to approve the ink. Luis held up a paper strip. This is the 3rd mix. It's too blue. It's wet. It will dry darker, not warmer. He looked at her more carefully. You know, ink? I know my color. She stood beside him while he added yellow by drops. The two of them argued over fractions no scale could measure. Ruth watched Claire rub a dried sample between her fingers and hold it beneath the production lights, then beneath the warmer lamp at the front counter. Frank used to do that, carry color around as if trying to catch it in a lie. At 7:30, Claire approved the mix. The first sheets ran clean. The second stack shifted against the guide and printed a 1/16 of an inch off center. Luis stopped the press, adjusted the feed, and marked the flawed sheets for waste. How much did that cost? Claire asked. About $9 in paper. And the ink? Not enough to count. The time? Luis looked at her. That's the part people forget. Claire did not look toward Ruth, but the message reached her anyway. John arrived at 8 in old slacks and Frank's Mercer print jacket. Ruth had left it over her chair, and Jean had apparently claimed it against the cold. Why are you here? Ruth asked. Luis said there'd be folding. Luis talks too much, not to customers. They cut and scored the finished sheets after the ink set. The locking tabs had to be tested, adjusted, then tested again. Claire learned to fold one edge, press the score with the side of her thumb, wrap the band around the box, and tuck the tab without bending the corner. Her first sleeve leaned, her second puckered. This is ridiculous, she said. You sell lotion for $90, Jean replied. The box can stand straight. By 10, Claire's hands were red along the edges. She removed her rings and placed them in the empty cash drawer. Ruth noticed one had belonged to Claire's mother. She noticed, too, that Claire trusted the shop enough to leave it there. The four of them formed a line around the work table. Luis folded the first score. Claire wrapped. Jean locked the tab. Ruth inspected and packed. Claire watched Ruth reject one for a faint ink smear. That's barely visible. It's on the front. The table will be dim. Then your guests can pay barely visible money. Claire gave her a look, but replaced the sleeve. Near midnight, Jean opened a container of soup and heated it in the break room microwave. Claire stood at the sink, rubbing moisturizer into her hands from a tester bottle. Dad never told me you did this at night, she said. Ruth kept counting finished sleeves. You came by. During the day. You saw people working. I saw Dad. Luis sat on an overturned paper carton, eating soup. Frank was good at being seen. The sentence could have sounded cruel. Luis said it with tired affection. Claire looked toward the empty office. I wanted his desk because I remember doing homework under it when I visited him after the divorce. Ruth's hands stopped. Claire gave a small, embarrassed shrug. I didn't think about where you would put invoices. Neither did I until it was gone. I can bring it back. It won't fit through your office door. A laugh escaped Claire before she could stop it. She covered her mouth, then laughed again. Ruth did too, picturing Daniel in the rain with the desk balanced uselessly behind his SUV. The laughter did not forgive anything. It loosened something that forgiveness might someday reach. At 1:15, 240 sleeves stood in rows across the shipping table. Cream paper, warm green ink, a simple leaf border, no embossing. They looked handmade without looking improvised. Claire picked up the first crooked one she had folded. Can I keep this? You paid for it, Ruth said. Claire met her eyes. I think I paid for the good ones. Ruth took the sleeve, wrote first on the inside, and handed it back. Claire slipped it into her purse. Then she reached for another flat sheet. We have enough, Ruth said. You have enough for Saturday. I need $1,500 for Monday. We cannot do that. I know. Claire aligned the edges carefully. So, tell me the real date and the real price. Ruth looked at Luis. He looked at the calendar, then at the press, and finally at Claire. 2 weeks, he said. Claire nodded. Write it down. Jean pulled a fresh yellow envelope from the drawer. Quantity? She asked. 1,500, Claire said. Delivery? Luis named a Thursday 2 weeks away. Price? Jean asked. Ruth looked at the exhausted faces around the table. Ink, paper, trade finishing, setup, waste, labor. Not the price Frank would have guessed. Not the price that would keep peace. The estimate will be ready Monday, she said. Claire opened her mouth, then stopped herself. Monday is fine. 50% deposit. I heard you the first 3 times. Good. Repetition costs extra. Claire's smile appeared slowly, almost against her will. She paid the balance for the emergency run before leaving at 2 in the morning. On Saturday, she collected the boxes herself. She had changed back into the woman from her advertisements, smooth hair, cream suit, understated jewelry, but there was green ink beside one thumbnail. These are good, she said. They're what you approved. That isn't the same thing. No, Ruth admitted. They're good. Claire carried 2 boxes to her car, then returned for the third, despite Luis offering to help. At the door, she shifted the weight against her hip. Come tonight. To the launch? Dinner starts at 7. I don't have anything to wear. That has never stopped you from declining my invitations. Ruth looked at the box between them. I'll try. Claire nodded as if she had expected nothing more. Daniel will be there. Then I'll try less hard. This time, Claire's smile came easily. Ruth did not attend. At 6:30, Paul Dempsey called because the retired barber's family had changed the service time and found an error in the name of the cemetery. The error was in the information they had supplied, but dead people did not benefit from being technically correct. Ruth and Jean reprinted the inside panels while Luis attended a dinner he refused to describe. At 8:20, Claire texted a photograph of the gift sets arranged on a long table. The cream sleeves glowed under warm lights. The green ink looked exactly right. No message accompanied the picture. Ruth saved it anyway. On Monday, she priced the full order. She called the trade finisher, confirmed a slot, added the actual paper cost, calculated Luis's press time, John's setup and packing time, delivery, waste, and profit. The number at the bottom made her uncomfortable. Too high? She asked Luis. He read the estimate. Too low. I included 20%. You included 20% after forgetting your time. My time is overhead. Your time is a thing humans get paid for. Jean leaned across the counter. I've been explaining that to men for 40 years. They hate it. Ruth added 6 hours of her own time at Jean's hourly rate. The total rose by $210. Claire approved it without negotiation and sent the deposit by electronic transfer. In the notes field, she wrote, including Ruth's time. Ruth showed it to no one. The OED side of John's calendar shrank to 7 jobs. The hardcover book had become a soft cover book and gone to the binder. The waterproof label customer received the first partial refund and a dated schedule for the rest. 3 smaller orders were finished. 2 customers canceled without demanding immediate repayment once Ruth explained what had happened. The shop's checking account stopped falling. It did not rise enough to call recovery. It hovered. Payroll cleared. Current materials were covered by current deposits. The overdue paper bill declined by hundreds instead of growing by thousands. Ruth paid herself $400, then felt guilty until Jean threatened to add her as a vendor and send collection letters. At the end of the 5th week, the 3 of them sat around the work table with the ledger open. Luis had washed his hands, but blue remained in the creases around his nails. Jean had brought a calculator from home because she said the shop's calculator rounded numbers, according to Frank's mood. Ruth placed 2 columns in front of them. If we close after the remaining owed jobs, equipment sales should cover most vendor debt, she said, depending on what the presses bring. The Heidelberg brings more running than dead, Luis said. That's why you're keeping it running. And the copier lease, we can transfer it or pay the early termination from equipment proceeds. Jean tapped the 2nd column. What's this? Operating through the end of the year. Neither spoke. Ruth disliked the sound of her own pulse. She had built the column at the apartment after midnight. Surrounded by boxes she still had not unpacked. It assumed no return of the hospital contract, no miracle customer, no sudden improvement. It used the average of the new properly priced jobs and excluded Claire's order as unusually large. Jean picked up the page. This says we could pay $1,800 rent. It says we could almost pay $1,800 rent. Almost is Frank's favorite amount, Luis said. I know. We'd need more regular work. Yes. And the copier still kills us. Yes. And you told everybody we're closing, repeatedly. Jean's mouth moved at one corner. That part we can fix. Ruth took back the paper. I didn't say we were staying open. You made a column. I make columns for things I don't do, such as travel budgets, places you want to go, places I want to know I can afford not to go. Luis leaned his forearms on the table. I have an interview Thursday. The paper in Ruth's hand became very light. Where? Crown Packaging. Production supervisor. Jean stopped smiling. You applied, Ruth said. You told me to. I know. Benefits. Steady schedule. More money. I know what a supervisor job is. I didn't say you didn't. Ruth aligned the pages in front of her. It took 2 attempts. You should interview. Luis looked at her for too long. That's it? What do you want me to say? I don't know. Then we're in the same position. He stood and carried his coffee cup to the sink, though it was still half full. Jean waited until he entered the press room. You could have told him you're considering staying open. I don't know that I am. You made a column. Stop saying that. Ruth closed the ledger. The front bell rang. Naomi entered with a stack of coffee tasting cards and held them up. Customer loves them. Wants another 500. Jean reached for a new envelope. Ruth said, Wait. All 3 women looked at one another. Naomi lowered the cards. Did I arrive during a murder? Not yet, Jean said. Ruth asked Naomi what the customer had paid for the job. Naomi told her. Then Ruth asked what portion represented Mercer Print's work. That feels personal. It's business. That's what people say before asking personal questions. Ruth waited. Naomi gave her the number. It was almost twice what Mercer Print had charged her. You knew we underpriced, Ruth said. I knew you priced as a subcontractor desperate for cash. Then the new price is $475. Naomi laughed. Ruth did not. You got serious fast, Naomi said. We were always serious. I'll do $425, $450. Paid on delivery because you supply stock. $435, $450. Naomi studied her, then extended her hand. Fine. After she left, Jean wrote the job on the earned side. You negotiated, she said. I've negotiated before. You usually apologize during it. Ruth opened the ledger again and drew a line through Naomi's old rate. Daniel arrived at noon the next day with a man who measured the front windows. No notice had been given. Ruth stepped between the man and the counter. "Who are you?" He lowered his tape measure. "Building contractor. Daniel." Her stepson stood near Frank's empty office, holding a roll of plans. "We're getting estimates. This won't interfere. You didn't give 24 hours notice. We're not showing it. The agreement says entry with notice except emergencies. We own the building, and I signed the agreement you sent." The contractor folded his tape measure slowly, eager to become smaller. Daniel's eyes moved toward the production room. "Can we speak outside?" "No." "Ruth." "No. Whatever you're doing affects John and Luis." Luis appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands. Daniel shifted the plans beneath his arm. "The physical therapy group is interested. They need cost estimates before they make an offer. An offer to lease, possibly to buy." Ruth felt the building around her, the uneven floor under the cutter, the warm air from the presses, the leak stain above the sink. She had spent 5 weeks imagining freedom from it. Now, every flaw seemed suddenly intimate. "When?" she asked. "They want possession in 60 days. We have an occupancy agreement, month to month. You said we'd discuss it if the shop continued. I'm discussing it." "No, you brought a contractor." Daniel's face tightened. "You said you were closing. Every decision Claire and I made was based on that. And every decision I made was based on the numbers Frank left me. They were wrong. That isn't our fault. I didn't say it was. You keep acting like the building is part of the business. It was for 37 years. It's an asset in the trust." There it was again. Asset. A word with clean hands. Ruth looked at Claire's full-order sleeve stacked near the shipping table, waiting for the finisher. Her stepdaughter's name appeared on everyone. Does Claire know? She knows they're interested. Does she know they want possession in 60 days? Daniel glanced away. Ruth almost smiled. "You keep knowing the first half of terrible things." He did not understand the reference, but Luis did. Daniel set the plans on the folding table. "I'll send formal notice. 30 days, as required. That gives you more than the 6 weeks you originally asked for." The contractor stared at the floor. Daniel walked out without measuring the remaining windows. Ruth stood beside the counter until the brass bell stopped trembling. Jean said quietly, "The column doesn't work without a building." "No," Ruth said. Luis looked through the front glass at Daniel crossing the street. "There are other buildings." Ruth shook her head. "Moving presses costs money. Electrical work costs money. Rent deposits cost money. We don't have it." Naomi's coffee cards remained on the counter. Ruth picked up one and ran her thumb across the scored center. The former grocery warehouse near the bus depot came back to her then, not from luck, but from Naomi complaining for years that its owner would not divide the space for her copy shop. Ugly brick, concrete floor, a loading entrance, too far from downtown foot traffic, close to 3 bus routes and the highway. She turned the card over. Naomi's number was printed on the back. Jean watched her reach for the phone. "I'm only asking a question," Ruth said. Jean picked up the green marker. "I didn't say anything." "Don't write on the calendar." "I'm not." "Put the marker down." Jean did, smiling. Ruth dialed Naomi. "What do you know about the old grocery warehouse?" she asked. Naomi knew the owner, the rent, the roof history, and which section of the warehouse had once held frozen peas. "You've been investigating," Ruth said. "I wanted the space 2 years ago." "What stopped you?" "Mrs. Klein wouldn't divide it, and I didn't need 4,300 square feet. Neither do I." "You do if you want the loading bay. The front half is useless unless you enjoy displaying abandoned shopping carts. Why would she divide it now? Her building has been empty 2 years. Naomi gave Ruth the number and warned her that Edith Klein believed every property became more valuable if described as flexible. Ruth called anyway. Edith met them at the warehouse the following morning, wearing rubber boots and carrying a flashlight large enough to direct aircraft. She was 71, with silver hair cut blunt at her jaw and a mustard-colored raincoat. "You're Frank Mercer's widow," she said. "I'm Ruth Mercer. I know. Frank printed my husband's retirement invitations. Put the wrong date on half. That sounds possible. He reprinted them. That also sounds possible." Edith unlocked a corrugated metal door. It rose with a groan, revealing a concrete loading floor, exposed block walls, and fluorescent fixtures yellowed with age. The air smelled faintly of cardboard, dust, and something vegetal that had survived every cleaning. Peas, Naomi said. I told you. Louise stepped inside and looked up, not at the room, but at conduit, support beams, and the old electrical panels. Jean rubbed her arms. Cozy. It has heat, Edith said. Where? Conceptually? They toured the space. The front entrance opened toward the bus depot, where brakes sighed every few minutes. A row of cloudy windows admitted more light than Ruth expected. The old manager's office had a cracked glass wall and a safe with no door. 2 restrooms worked. One toilet ran continuously until Edith struck the tank with her flashlight. The loading entrance was wide enough for a press rigger. The floor was thick. 3-phase electrical service remained from the grocery refrigeration system, though none of the outlets were where Mercer Print needed them. Luis opened the breaker panel. This helps. How much? Ruth asked. It helps. Don't turn it into a number yet. In the rear corner, an overhead pipe had left a brown stain down the wall. Roof leaks, Ruth said. Roof leaked, Edith corrected. Membrane was replaced last spring. She produced a folder of paid invoices before Ruth could ask. Frank would have told a story. Edith brought receipts. The space was ugly. The space was also 7 blocks from Main Street, 3 minutes from the highway, and close enough to the bus depot that Jean could stop driving after dark if she wanted. Ruth imagined the cutter near the loading door, the Heidelberg where the concrete was thickest, order tables beneath the windows. Then she imagined winter wind coming under the metal door, and every dollar flowing into a building she did not own. How much? She asked. 1,400? Naomi made a strangled sound. Heat included, Edith added. You just said it has heat conceptually. I'll service the unit before occupancy. What term? 3 years. Ruth looked around again. 3 years was not long for a business. It was different when measured against a 68-year-old body that already hurt from standing at the cutter. 1 year, she said. 3, then no. She began walking toward the door. Edith's boots struck the concrete behind her. 2 years with a renewal option. 1 year with 2 one-year options. 1,500. You started at 14. That was for commitment. Ruth stopped beneath an old sign that read, Employees must wash hands. $12.50 the first year. 14 after that. You divide the front space, service the heat, and split required electrical work. Edith considered her. You pay for the partition. I don't need the partition. You wanted to divide the building. Naomi looked delighted enough to charge admission. Edith tapped the flashlight against her boot. 1,300. 1 year, 2 options. Half electrical up to 5,000. I service heat and give you 30 days before the rent starts. 60. 45. Done. They shook hands. Only after Edith left to retrieve a draft lease did Ruth notice Luis watching her. What? You told Carlo you'd never negotiated. I said I had. You should do it more. My blood pressure disagrees. The move estimate arrived that afternoon. $8,600 for rigging the Heidelberg, cutter, folder, small offset press, and 2 finishing machines. Electrical work would cost Mercer Prince half of Edith's limit, perhaps more. The deposit and insurance brought the immediate need above $12,000. The checking account held less than 7. Ruth spread the figures across the folding table. The column she had made for operating through the year now looked optimistic enough to be insulting. We don't move the Miller, Louise said. The Miller was the oldest offset press, a broad gray machine that occupied a quarter of the rear room and had not run since Easter. Frank had bought it used in 1998 and told the story as if he rescued it from a fire. In fact, he bought it from a catalog printer in Erie and spent 6 months complaining about freight. It's worth something, Ruth said. As parts. How much? Maybe 4,000. 5 if the buyer removes it. Frank said it was worth 20. Frank said a lot of things. The phrase had become an answer nobody enjoyed. They listed everything the new shop actually needed. Heidelberg, cutter, folder, copier, 1 small offset press, work tables, shelving, computers. The rest went into a second column. The Miller, an unused plate burner, a collator that jammed every 6th set, 2 cabinets of obsolete type, and a shrink wrapper Frank bought at auction without checking its voltage. Jean held up the list. How did we fit all this in here? By violating the fire code spiritually, Louise said. A used equipment dealer offered $4,500 for the Miller and plate burner, if he handled removal. Naomi wanted the cutter, but Ruth refused to sell a machine they used every day. A church printer bought the old collator for $600 after Luis demonstrated its preferred angle of persuasion. The sales closed part of the gap, not all. Ruth took the lease home and read it twice at the galley counter. The apartment windows were open, letting in the pharmacy exhaust fan and the announcement of a bus turning at the corner. Frank's jacket hung on the back of a chair. The muddy landscape still leaned against the wall because Ruth had not found anyone willing to take it. She signed the lease at 11:12. Afterward, she sat alone with a cup of tea until it went cold. She had expected a feeling: triumph, terror, guilt. What came was simpler. She had chosen something without Frank, not reacted to him, cleaned up after him, or preserved what he left. Chosen. The next morning, Daniel's formal termination notice arrived by certified mail. Ruth signed for it, opened it, and placed it in the paid job rack where nobody would mistake it for an emergency. Claire's full order returned from the trade finisher that afternoon. The embossed leaf was subtle, visible only when light crossed it. Luis tested the folds and approved them. John boxed the sleeves in quantities of 100. Claire came to inspect them and ran one finger over the raised paper. "These are exactly what I wanted. They cost exactly what we quoted," Ruth said. "I'm learning." She paid the balance. Then she noticed the equipment list taped to the wall. "What's that?" "Moving inventory." Claire turned. "Moving where?" "The old grocery warehouse near the bus depot." "You found a place?" "Yes. Daniel said you couldn't afford to move." "Daniel says many things before asking." Claire examined the lease copy on the order table, then the equipment sale agreements. "You sold Dad's Miller? It's leaving Tuesday." He loved that press. He loved talking about that press. Luis loved keeping it alive. Luis did not look up from his work. Claire's hand remained on the lease. "Why didn't you tell me? You had a launch. That was last week. I was busy finding $12,000. I could have helped." Ruth looked at her. Claire flinched before Ruth said anything. "Not as a favor, a loan, with interest, in writing. Thank you." "No, you're selling equipment because you won't borrow from me. I'm selling equipment because we don't use it. What about the rest? We have most of it. Most is not all. We'll manage." Claire's jaw tightened in a way Ruth now recognized as Frank's. "You know, refusing help can be a kind of control." Ruth thought of what Luis had said about weaponizing truth. "Yes," she said, "it can." Claire had prepared for resistance, not agreement. Ruth continued. "If the electrical work exceeds the estimate, I'll call you about a loan. Proper terms. No free printing attached." "Fine," I said, "if I heard you." Claire took the first box of sleeves, then set it down again. "Daniel didn't tell me he was sending the notice until after he sent it. He knew the first half." "What?" "Nothing. I told him not to bring the contractor without notice. He thinks I'm taking your side." "Are you?" Claire considered the question. "I'm taking the side where people say what they're doing before they do it." It was not loyalty, but it was a beginning Ruth could trust. Luis's interview took place the next morning. He wore a white shirt Ruth had never seen and borrowed Frank's old clothes brush from the supply closet to remove dust from his trousers. "You look employable," Joan told him. "Don't ruin my reputation." Ruth kept her eyes on the ledger. "What time will you be back?" "I don't know if I will." The bluntness hurt because she had earned it. He left at 10 and did not return by lunch. Ruth tried running the folder herself and fed 3 sheets crooked before Zahn took over. At 2, the Heidelberg developed a clicking sound. Ruth shut it down rather than guess. Luis came back at 4:20. He had removed his tie and rolled it into his pocket. He walked directly to the silent Heidelberg, opened the guard, and turned the flywheel by hand. "Gripper bar," he said. "Not serious." "How was the interview?" Jean asked. "Fine. What does fine mean?" "They offered me the job." The shop seemed to contract around the sentence. "When do you start?" Ruth asked. "I haven't accepted." "Why not?" Luis closed the guard. "I wanted to hear your plan." Ruth glanced at the signed warehouse lease, the move estimate, and the list of equipment being sold. "You've seen it. I've seen how you pay for the move. I want to know what happens after." He sat across from her at the folding table. "Crown offers health insurance," he said. "Vacation. More money than I make here. Not a lot more, but more. I can't match that." "I know. I won't ask you to turn it down for Frank's name." "Good, because I wouldn't." Jean busied herself near the cutter, close enough to hear. Ruth opened the ledger. For 26 years Frank had shown her totals after decisions were made. He had called that protecting her. She turned the book toward Luis. I can offer profit sharing, she said. Not pretend profit. The books stay open. After debt payments and operating reserves, a percentage goes to you and John. If the shop survives 1 year, we discuss an ownership share earned over time. Luis did not look at the numbers. He looked at her. Discuss? Ruth took Frank's pencil from her pocket and crossed out the word on her notes. We put the terms in writing now, she said. He pulled the ledger closer. All right, he said. Show me everything. Luis read every page. He did not skim totals or pretend to understand numbers he had not checked. He asked why the copier lease increased in March, whether the insurance covered equipment in transit, and how much of Allegheny Paper's balance carried late fees. Ruth answered until she had answers left, then wrote questions in the margin. Jean pulled up a chair. If we're opening the books, she said, I'd like to know whether my retirement plan is still marrying rich. You'll need a broader search area, Luis said. Ruth showed her the operating forecast. They stayed until 7. By then, Luis had reduced Ruth's projected sales by 10%, increased utilities at the warehouse, and added maintenance reserves she had left out. You made it worse, Jean told him. I made it real. Frank made things real in the other direction. It was more cheerful. The revised numbers still worked, but narrowly. There was room for a small profit-sharing pool only after current bills, agreed debt payments, taxes, and 1 month's operating reserve. Luis proposed 10% of remaining quarterly profit divided between eligible employees by hours worked. Quarterly, Jean asked. I could be dead by quarter. Then your estate gets a surprisingly modest check. Ruth wrote the terms down. For Luis, she added an ownership interest that would build over 3 years, beginning at 5% after the first full year, provided he remained production manager and the business stayed current on new obligations. He could earn up to 15% without buying in, then purchase more, later at a price based on the shop's actual value. What is its actual value? He asked. At the moment, Ruth looked around. 4 useful machines, 17 headaches, and a name Daniel thinks belongs to a wall. Luis smiled. Put that in the agreement. I'm serious, so am I. He wanted authority to reject unprofitable jobs and stop unsafe equipment. Ruth agreed. He wanted guaranteed paid vacation after 6 months. We've never closed a week, John said. We've nearly died several Thursdays. Ruth added vacation. Jean declined any ownership interest. I don't want to own something that can call me at home. She accepted profit sharing and asked for a 3-day schedule after the move. You've worked 5 days for 19 years, Ruth said. I'm 63. My knees have begun a formal protest. You should have said something. I just did. They drafted until the legal language ran beyond all 3 of them. Ruth arranged for an attorney to turn their terms into a proper agreement. A cost that made her wince and Luis approve. Paperwork before promises, he said. Ruth knew who he meant. He called Crown Packaging the next morning and declined the job. He did it outside, away from Ruth, and returned looking neither relieved nor regretful. Still time to change your mind, she said. So there's no agreement? There's an agreement. Then stop trying to fire me. I'm giving you an exit. I know where the door is. He started the Heidelberg. The miller left on Tuesday. 2 men from the equipment dealership spent 3 hours disconnecting it. One crawled beneath the frame with a wrench, while the other removed rollers darkened by decades of ink. Luis stood nearby, answering questions. Frank had kept maintenance notes inside a metal cabinet attached to the press, though half consisted of dates followed by phrases like Felt ODD and Lewis fixed. The dealer found those less useful than Frank had. When the forklift lifted the machine, a dark rectangle appeared beneath it. The concrete had not seen daylight since 1998. Dust, paper clips, a dried rubber band, and 1 petrified peppermint outlined the press's old footprint. Jean looked at the peppermint. Mine. No one doubted it, Ruth said. The machine rolled toward the loading door. Its frame nearly struck the opening, and everyone shouted different instructions until Luis silenced them with 1 raised hand. The dealers lowered it, shifted 2 inches, and tried again. Ruth remembered Frank standing in that doorway when the miller arrived, soaked with rain and ecstatic about a bargain that had already cost twice his estimate. He had kissed her in front of the delivery crew, leaving a streak of grease on her cheek. For months afterward, he called it their future. The press passed through the door with less than an inch to spare. Ruth did not cry. She swept the rectangle it left behind. The equipment check paid the rigger's deposit. The electrical estimate at the warehouse rose by $1,800 when the electrician discovered the old three-phase panel lacked proper grounding for the Heidelberg. Edith Klein paid her agreed half up to the limit and not a cent beyond. "A deal is a deal," she said. "I didn't ask. You were about to." Ruth found Claire's number on her phone and stared at it for several seconds before calling. Claire answered during business hours in a whisper. "Is everything okay? The electrical work is overestimate." A pause. "How much?" $1,800 beyond what we have covered. I can repay it in 6 months at 5% interest. 3, 5. Banks don't negotiate upward, Ruth. You're not a bank. No, apparently I'm a dangerous source of favorable terms. Ruth nearly ended the call. Then she heard Claire's restraint, the absence of triumph, advice, or questions about why Ruth had not planned better. 4%, Ruth said. "Fine. I'll send a simple note for both of us to sign. No free printing. I am never letting you forget those sleeves, am I?" "No?" "Good. I wouldn't trust you if you did." The money arrived the next morning. Ruth signed the loan note and scheduled automatic monthly payments. It was the first practical thing she and Claire had done together that did not carry Frank's permission somewhere inside it. Boxes accumulated along the shop walls. Jean labeled them with a system that began sensibly. Office, bindery, shipping, and deteriorated under stress. One carton read, "Cords We Fear." Another read, "Frank's Mystery Metal." Luis opened that one. "These are press keys." Then why did he keep them in a cigar box marked taxes, security? The remaining owed jobs fell to 3. The business cards with the rescued N were collected. The Historical Society books returned from the binder with clean square spines. The waterproof label refund was paid in full after the customer chose not to proceed. Ruth crossed the last refund from her list and sat for a moment with the pen suspended. Frank's old obligations no longer owned every dollar in the account. The realization came without celebration. John was arguing with a tape dispenser. Luis was on the phone explaining paper thickness to Naomi. A bus hissed at the corner outside. Ordinary life refused to provide music for turning points. Ruth wrote "paid" beside the customer's name. The next hour, Jean dropped a box of envelopes. She bent to pick them up, then stopped with one hand braced against the shipping table. "What is it?" Ruth asked. "Nothing." Jean's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. Luis crossed the room. "Sit down." "I am perfectly." Her knees softened. Luis caught her under one arm before she hit the floor. Ruth pulled a chair close, and they lowered Jan onto it. Jean's glasses hung crooked from the beaded chain. "I stood too fast," she said. "You were already standing," Ruth replied. "That explains why it surprised me." She tried to smile. Sweat shone above her upper lip. Ruth called for medical help, despite Jean's objections. The paramedics arrived while a customer waited outside the locked front door, holding a sample menu. Jean apologized to them for the shop being untidy. At the clinic, they found no heart attack, no stroke, nothing dramatic enough to match Ruth's fear. Jean was dehydrated, overtired, and ignoring blood pressure readings her physician had already warned her about. She received fluids, instructions, and a lecture she described as overpriced. Ruth sat beside her until Claire arrived. "I can take her home," Claire said. Jean looked from one woman to the other. "Do I get a vote?" "No," they said together. Claire drove. Ruth followed in her Buick. At Jean's small duplex, they settled her on the couch beneath a crocheted blanket and stocked the side table with water. "You're not working tomorrow," Ruth said. "I know, or the next day. Bossy widow. And at the warehouse, 3 days, 6 hours. We said 3 days, not 6 hours. We're renegotiating." Jean looked at Claire. "She's become impossible." Claire opened a bottle of water. "I've heard." Jean accepted it. Good for her. Back at the shop, Ruth found Luis taping boxes alone. "We can't do this with 2 people," she said. "We can't do it with 3 if one ends up in an ambulance." It wasn't an ambulance. They took her in the clinic transport. Important distinction. Ruth sank into Frank's old chair, then remembered it was not there. She landed instead on the folding chair, with a jolt that traveled up her spine. "We need someone for the counter, for more than the move. We can't afford another full-time wage. Part-time. Train them on estimates and order entry. Jean can cover 3 days." Ruth rubbed both hands over her face. We're changing locations, selling equipment, finishing orders, adding profit sharing, and hiring. Sounds like a business. It sounds like a nervous breakdown with invoices. Naomi recommended Tasha Green, a 38-year-old who managed orders for a sign company before it relocated. Tasha arrived for the interview in work boots and a red blazer, carrying samples of job tickets she had designed because the sign company's old system annoyed her. Ruth liked her immediately and distrusted the feeling. What would you do if a customer demanded same-day work? Ruth asked. Check capacity, price the rush, and say no if production says no. Luis looked at Ruth. What if the customer says Frank always did it? Ruth asked. Who's Frank? Jean, participating by speakerphone from her couch, said, hire her. Tasha accepted 24 hours a week with a review after 3 months. Her first shift began among boxes and exposed rectangles where equipment had stood. The last week on Main Street became a sequence of endings too busy to feel final. Customers collected orders and asked where the new place was. Jean mailed address cards. Naomi updated Mercer Print's online listing while complaining about its prehistoric website. Carlo promised food for moving day and demanded a larger stack of change of address cards for his counter. Daniel came through one afternoon after the sold equipment had gone. He stood in the rear room, looking at the dark floor marks. You made it look bigger, he said, by removing things. The therapy group is bringing in walls. That's usually how rooms get smaller. He walked to Frank's empty office. The folding table remained, covered with the last move lists. Claire said you borrowed money from her. I did. She offered to help me with the building plans, then said she was too busy because of your sleeves. They were her sleeves. You know what I mean. Ruth put down her marker. I usually don't. Daniel looked toward the front window, where Tasha was applying the new address beneath the Mercer Print logo. I thought you'd be relieved, he said. To close. So did I. You never cared about the presses the way Dad did. No. The answer startled him. Ruth continued. I cared whether customers got what they paid for. I cared whether Luis could run a machine without your father changing the schedule. I cared whether John went home before dark. Frank loved the presses. The shop needed other things. Daniel's face closed. You always do that, he said. What? Make him sound smaller after he's gone? Ruth felt the old temptation to protect Frank from consequences, even now. She let it pass. Your father was large enough to have failures, she said. You don't honor him by leaving the rest of us underneath them. Daniel picked up the marker, turned it in his hand, then set it down exactly where she had placed it. The desk is still at Claire's, he said. She wants it out. I don't have room. What should we do with it? Ruth looked at the empty office and thought of Frank, bent over that walnut surface, writing promises the shop could not keep. Whatever people do with valuable things, she said. Daniel left without answering. On the final evening before the riggers arrived, Ruth stood alone beneath the brass bell. The shop had been swept. Packed boxes waited by the loading door. Frank's jacket rested over her arm. Luis had disconnected what he could. Tasha had taken the computers. Jean had been forbidden to come in and had called 6 times. Ruth turned off the front lights. Tomorrow, the machines would leave. The day after that, Daniel would own an empty building. The brass bell rang when Ruth opened the door for the riggers at 6:30. She had heard it thousands of times, but in the empty shop it sounded brighter, freed from the presses and phones that usually swallowed it. The 2 riggers entered carrying steel plates, chains, and enough wooden blocks to build a small cabin. Coffee's in the back, Ruth said. The older man looked around. Where's the machine? The green one. He stared at the Heidelberg. That machine is black. It was green on the purchase papers. Luis came through the loading entrance. Frank was colorblind when he negotiated. The rigger grunted. That explains used equipment dealers. They began with the cutter. Ruth tried to stay useful, but machinery moving had no task for a 68-year-old widow in sensible shoes. Every time she lifted a box, someone took it from her. When she picked up a broom, the rigger needed her to stand elsewhere. Claire arrived at 8 wearing jeans and carrying breakfast sandwiches. What are you doing here? Ruth asked. Learning to hold boxes correctly. You have 3 boutiques. They're all capable of surviving until noon. Claire placed the food on the counter and went to help Tasha remove the last drawers from the shipping cabinet. She did not ask permission again. The cutter rolled out on steel skates. Without it, the production room looked wounded. Pale outlines marked the floor. Scraps too small for any broom had worked into cracks around the machine. burgundy paper, silver foil, a triangle of yellow stock Ruth remembered from menus they printed 15 years earlier. Daniel entered through the front while the riggers positioned chains around the Heidelberg. "I need the keys," he said. "You get them when the equipment is out. They're bringing demolition crews Monday. Then you won't need keys today." His gaze found Claire beside the empty cabinet. "You said you had appointments. I moved them? For this?" "For Ruth." The simplicity of it tightened his face. One of the riggers called for Luis, and conversation became impossible beneath the scrape of steel. The Heidelberg lifted a fraction of an inch, settled onto skates, and began its slow journey toward the loading door. Luis walked backward in front of it, watching clearance. Ruth stood against the wall with Frank's jacket folded over her arms. Daniel looked at the jacket. "You kept that. Jean wears it when she's cold. Dad wore it. Then you should have taken it with the furniture. I'm not trying to take it. No, you're just surprised something remained." Claire stopped taping a drawer shut. "Ruth." The warning was gentle. Ruth heard it anyway. Daniel walked to the front window. The painted sign had already been removed, leaving a clean rectangle against faded brick outside. Mercer Print letterpress lay face up in the back of Luis's truck. "You took the sign," Daniel said. "It goes with the shop." "I know." He looked through the glass at the Main Street sidewalk. Frank used to wash that window himself, because he believed streaks suggested poor registration. In his last year, Ruth washed it before he arrived, and let him think the rain had done an unusually good job. The Heidelberg reached the loading door. The clearance was tighter than the Millers had been. Everyone stopped breathing while the flywheel passed the frame. Daniel spoke without turning. "Claire says you think we stripped you out of the house." Claire's tape dispenser went silent. "I didn't say that. You made comments. I made one comment about a dining table. It belonged to our mother. I agreed it belonged to her. Then what were we supposed to do?" Ruth looked at the back of his neck, at the same stubborn set Frank's had taken when he felt accused. "You were supposed to notice what you were leaving," she said. Daniel turned. She continued before he could defend himself. "The silver belonged to your mother. The cabin was in the trust. The house was yours. I understood every reason. You took Frank's desk from an operating business and told me I could buy one at Staples. Claire wanted it." Claire said, "Don't put that all on me." Daniel looked at her. "I wanted the desk," Claire said. "I didn't think about Ruth using it. Neither did you." He stared at his sister as if she had switched languages. The riggers called for the truck to back closer. Diesel noise filled the rear room. Daniel lowered his voice. "Dad wanted us to have those things." "Yes," Ruth said, "and you have them. What do you want now?" The question held genuine confusion. Daniel understood demands. He could answer an amount, divide property, schedule delivery. Ruth had no object to name. "I wanted you to know that being entitled to something doesn't make the way you carry it away harmless." He looked down at the floor. Ruth shifted Frank's jacket to one arm. "I have to move." Daniel nodded once. He left through the front door, ringing the bell behind him. Claire watched him cross the street. "He'll be angry with me for a month, probably. He was right about the table. I know. That doesn't make everything else right. I know that too." The Heidelberg reached the warehouse before noon. The riggers lowered it onto the concrete pad Luis had marked. The cutter followed, then the folder and small offset press. Boxes arrived in Jean's duplex neighbor's van, Naomi's car, Claire's SUV, Tasha's truck, and Ruth's Buick. Carlo sent trays of baked ziti, bread, and salad, with a handwritten invoice for $0. At the bottom, he had written, "Family rate." Ruth circled the words in red and wrote, "One time only." Marlene arrived with the Recovery Alliance hand truck and used it to move paper cartons from the loading bay. Naomi hung temporary signs at the front entrance, then complained that the windows made her lettering look crooked. "It is crooked," Tasha said. "I liked you better before Ruth hired you." Jean appeared at 2, carrying a folding chair and wearing Frank's jacket. "You're supposed to be home," Ruth said. "I was home. It was full of people telling me to rest. You are not lifting anything. I brought my own chair. You're not working." Jean unfolded the chair behind the temporary front counter. "Then I'll sit here and give opinions." Within minutes, she had organized incoming boxes by department, corrected Tasha's inventory sheet, and answered 2 customer calls. Ruth let her stay for 1 hour. At 3, the electrician switched on the new panel. The lights brightened. The cutter display came alive. Luis pressed the Heidelberg starter. The motor turned backward. He shut it off so quickly the press barely completed half a movement. Everyone went silent. "What happened?" Ruth asked. "Phase sequences reversed." The electrician frowned. "Panel tested correctly. Machine says otherwise." He checked his meter, then the wiring at the disconnect. One pair of conductors had been crossed between the panel and the machine. "That's an easy fix," he said. "Easy is good," Ruth replied. "Easy still takes an hour. Easy was never going to be free." At 5:10, the Heidelberg turned in the correct direction. Its rhythm filled the warehouse, sharper against bare block walls. The sound traveled through the concrete and up Ruth's legs. For a moment she felt Frank so near that she looked toward the loading door, expecting his large frame to appear with some criticism about placement. Luis listened to the press through several cycles. "She's level," he said. Ruth put one palm against the feed table. The metal vibrated, steady and alive. "Good," she said. That was all she trusted herself to say. They did not open the next morning. Nothing was where anyone expected. The phones forwarded incorrectly. The heat came on, but blew the smell of old dust through every vent. Tasha found that the counter drawers could not open fully because a support post stood behind them. They moved the counter. A paper delivery went to Main Street, where Daniel refused it and called Ruth. "Your order is blocking the sidewalk. Tell the driver to come to the bus depot." "I did, thank you." He paused. The therapy group signed a letter of intent. "I'm glad." "You are?" "It's a good building." He seemed disappointed by the absence of envy. "The desk is going into storage," he said. "That sounds sensible. Claire says she doesn't want it." Ruth looked across the warehouse at the work table beneath the cloudy windows. Tasha had claimed one end for job tickets. Jean's chair occupied the other. There was no office for a walnut desk and no need to invent one. "Sell it," Ruth said. "It was Dad's." "Yes." Daniel ended the call without saying goodbye. Mercer Print reopened on Monday with no ceremony. The permanent sign had not arrived. Naomi's temporary vinyl letters leaned slightly uphill. The front room held 3 mismatched chairs, a borrowed counter, and one plant Claire brought that began dropping leaves within an hour. The brass bell had been mounted above the new door. The first customer through it was Paul Dempsey, carrying a photograph and an envelope of service information. "Sorry," he said. "Bad way to christen a place." "It's work," Ruth replied. He looked around. "Different." "Yes." Frank would have hated the windows. They can be cleaned. He would have hated the buses. They pay exact fare and leave on time. Paul smiled and set the photograph on the counter. 200 cards. Friday, if possible. Tasha checked the calendar, then asked Luis for production time. He gave her an estimate. She calculated paper, labor, and setup. Ruth watched without interrupting. "Friday at 3, Tasha said. 50% deposit." Paul wrote the check. The new system worked exactly once. Then Carlo called because he had spilled wine over half his menu stock. Naomi arrived with a die that did not fit the press, and the copier displayed an error code none of them had seen. Ruth spent the afternoon on hold with service while buses exhaled outside, and Jean told 3 customers they could not have same-day work. At closing, Ruth's feet hurt so badly she removed her shoes beneath the counter. The warehouse was colder than Main Street. Her hands smelled of cardboard and machine oil. Luis sat beside her with the day's production sheet. "We made $86 after labor," he said, "before overhead. So we lost money. Today." Ruth leaned her head against the concrete wall. "Crown Packaging still hiring?" "Probably. You can still go." "So can you." She looked at him. "You signed a 1-year lease," he said. "Not a prison sentence." Tasha brought over the cash drawer. Jean, who had stayed 20 minutes beyond her 6-hour limit, put on her coat. The permanent sign installer arrived just before dark. He mounted Mercer Print letterpress above the entrance while Ruth watched from the parking lot. The sign looked smaller against the warehouse than it had downtown. No brick trim, no old-fashioned storefront, no Frank Mercer standing beneath it with ink on his cuffs. Just letters on plain block. Claire pulled in as the installer packed his ladder. She had come to collect the final boxes of sleeves. Daniel's green pickup followed her into the lot. Ruth stiffened. Daniel got out holding the brass plate from the walnut desk. It bore his grandfather's name and the date 1948. "Found this underneath?" he said. He handed it to her. "I don't need it." "I know." He pushed his hands into his coat pockets. I thought maybe the shop should have something. Ruth looked at the plate. The shop had Frank's name, his debts, his machines, his habits, and stains from years no cleaning could remove. It did not need another object to prove he existed. She gave the plate back. Put it on the desk, she said. That's where it belongs. Daniel closed his fingers around it. Claire carried her boxes inside. Daniel remained beside Ruth, looking up at the new sign. It doesn't look right, he said. No. You think it'll work here? I don't know. He nodded, perhaps recognizing the first answer she had given him that did not ask him to feel guilty. After he left, Ruth locked the door beneath the brass bell. Inside, Claire's boxes waited beside Paul's new job envelope. The machines cooled in the dark. The warehouse smelled less like frozen peas than it had that morning. Ruth stood beneath the crooked temporary lettering and the permanent sign beyond it, listening to buses come and go. For the first time, she was not finishing Frank's work. Tomorrow's work was theirs. The first winter in the warehouse exposed every optimistic number in Ruth's column. The heater worked, but only in the sense that warm air came out somewhere. The front counter stayed cold enough for Jean to wear Frank's jacket over 2 sweaters. Paper curled near the loading door. The bus brakes squealed during phone calls, and one driver began waving through the window each morning as though Mercer Print were part of his route. The copier required a new fuser in December. Ruth stared at the repair estimate until Luis took it away from her. We use it every day, he said. I know. It earned the repair. I know. Then why are you looking at it like a ransom note? Because ransoms are negotiable. They repaired it. No hospital contract returned. Bollinger Foods did not have a change of heart. Instead, Paul brought funeral home work. Carlo brought menus and 3 restaurant owners who distrusted websites. Naomi brought short-run labels that larger printers considered irritating. Marlene's organization ordered programs for its spring conference and paid the price Jean calculated without asking for a nonprofit miracle. Tasha learned which jobs belonged on the Heidelberg and which should never come near it. She stopped customers from walking directly into production, something Frank had encouraged because he liked an audience. Within 3 months, Luis referred to the front counter as Tasha's border checkpoint. The first profit-sharing quarter produced checks so small that Jean held hers to the light. I can retire by Thursday, she said. It's more than Frank shared, Luis replied. Jean folded the check into her handbag. Then I'll retire Friday. She did not. She worked 3 short days, drank the water Claire bought her in an enormous insulated cup, and allowed Tasha to carry paper cartons. When she caught Ruth staying after 9, she called Claire. This is harassment, Ruth said the first time Claire arrived to drive her home. It's family, Claire replied. Apparently there's overlap. Claire's loan was repaid in 6 months, with 4% interest and no free printing. Her company's orders came through Tasha, accompanied by proper files, deposits, and deadlines. Once, when one of Claire's managers requested an impossible rush, Claire wrote beneath a forwarded email, "Say no in whatever font is clearest." Daniel did not visit the warehouse. Ruth saw him occasionally at the old Main Street building, which became Bellwether Physical Therapy after months of construction. The walnut desk remained in storage because it was too large for Claire's office and too sentimental for Daniel to sell. Neither of them asked Ruth about it again. Mercer Print paid the old paper balance in the spring. Ed Halpern sent a statement showing 0 due. At the bottom, in his narrow handwriting, he wrote, "Frank would be proud." Ruth placed the statement in the ledger and did not decide whether that was true. Pride had been one of Frank's least reliable forms of currency. He would have hated the bus depot, criticized the temporary shelving, and tried to accept every job Tasha rejected. He would also have walked around the Heidelberg with his palm on the metal, listening until he knew whether it had survived the move. Ruth missed him most when the shop did something right. A clean press run could hollow her out without warning. So could lemon cookies, bad pencils, and men who carried coffee black with 1 sugar. Grief did not shrink as neatly as debt. It became less interested in ruining whole days and more skilled at entering ordinary ones. At the end of the first full year, Luis's 5% ownership interest took effect. The attorney brought papers to the warehouse. Luis read every page, as Ruth knew he would. Jean brought grocery store cake with part owner written in blue icing. The bakery had misspelled owner, then corrected it by squeezing an extra loop into the W. Appropriate, Tasha said. We specialize in revisions. Luis signed at the same folding table they had moved from Main Street. Afterward, he stood with the pen in his hand. Frank would never have done this, he said. No, Ruth replied. The answer did not need gratitude attached. He worked fewer nights after becoming an owner, not more. That surprised Ruth until he explained that ownership meant protecting the person who knew how to run production. He trained Tasha on basic machine schedules and hired a part-time press assistant from a nearby commercial shop when sales justified it. Jean retired the following autumn. She announced it during lunch, between bites of Carlo's baked ziti. I'm done the last Friday in October. Ruth put down her fork. Done? Retired. It's a word people use when they stop coming to work, but remain available for lunch. You didn't tell me you were considering it. I've been 63, then 64, directly in front of you. Ruth tried not to take it as abandonment. She failed for several days. Jean trained Tasha on every customer habit she considered important. Paul needed confirmation in writing. Carlo changed numbers after approval. Naomi bargained for sport, but paid on time. Claire Mercer was never to be given free printing, especially if she asked sweetly. On Jean's final day, the shop presented her with Frank's jacket. Tasha had cleaned it and embroidered Jean beneath the company name. Jean pressed the fabric to her face. I was cold, she said. I didn't need a ceremony. It's not a ceremony, Luis told her. There's no seating. She wore the jacket home. The idea for the book began with Tasha, who objected to printing another promotional calendar. Nobody wants 12 pictures of presses, she said. Frank did, Ruth replied. Frank isn't our target customer. They were approaching Mercer Print's 40th year. Tasha proposed 40 portraits of local people beside the tools they used. Cooks, mechanics, florists, barbers, machinists, seamstresses, printers. Not glamorous business owners standing beneath logos. Hands doing work. Naomi knew a photographer willing to trade part of her fee for printing. Carlo demanded inclusion, then spent an hour choosing which knife made him look least vain. Marlene brought the hand truck she had used to collect her first booklets. Paul stood beside the long table where he assembled service folders, one hand resting on a bone folder polished by years of use. Luis was photographed at the Heidelberg. Jean returned in her jacket and posed behind the old order counter they had brought from Main Street. When the photographer asked where Ruth wanted to stand, she pointed to the folding table. You own the shop, Tasha said. Maybe the front door? I worked at the table. She stood with one hand on the ledger and the other holding Frank's uneven pencil. Frank became the 40th portrait. Claire supplied a photograph taken before his hands began to tremble. He stood beside the Miller press, smiling at something beyond the frame, his sleeves rolled and his palm black with ink. Daniel gave permission to use it, but did not answer the invitation to write the caption. Ruth wrote it herself. Frank Mercer, founder and pressman. He loved machines, difficult paper, second chances, and promises larger than his calendar. She left it there. The book took 4 months. It was not profitable enough for Luis and not expensive enough for Claire. Ruth approved it anyway. Mercer Print charged everyone included only for copies they ordered, then produced a limited anniversary run the business could afford. The supper was held in the warehouse on a Friday evening. Carlo provided food at a rate Ruth checked twice. Naomi hung portrait proofs along the block wall. Jean sat near the heater in her embroidered jacket. Edith Klein complained that nobody had mentioned the building would look so good occupied. Daniel arrived after dinner had begun. He stood beneath the brass bell, uncertain where to put his hands. Claire saw him first and carried a plate over. He took it without argument. Ruth watched him move along the portraits. He stopped at Frank's, then Luis's, then hers. The photographer had caught Ruth looking down at the ledger, mouth slightly curved as if someone had said something foolish outside the frame. Age showed plainly in her hands. So did strength, though not the kind that lifted presses or conquered rooms. The kind that kept its place at a table. Daniel read her caption. Ruth Mercer, bookkeeper, customer keeper, owner. She made the promises fit the work. He came to stand beside her. You put Dad first, he said. He founded the shop. But the book isn't about him. No. Daniel looked around the warehouse. Claire was laughing with Jean. Luis had cornered the photographer to discuss paper finish. Tasha stood at the counter selling books and correcting the inventory count between transactions. The old building doesn't feel like his anymore, Daniel said. Ruth waited. I thought it would. You have the building. He nodded. This time he heard the distinction. I was angry about the things, Ruth said. I'm not now. Because you got this? Because I chose this. Daniel looked down at his plate. I don't know what you want me to say. Then don't say what you don't know. It was not forgiveness. It was room for something more honest than an apology performed on schedule. He stayed for dessert. After the tables were cleared, Claire found Ruth near the cutter. She held a small leather box. I almost didn't bring this. Inside was Frank's gold watch. Claire lifted it from the velvet. Daniel took the collection, but this one was at my house. Dad wore it every day before the hospital. I remember. I think you should have it. Why? Claire swallowed. Because you gave him the most time. For a moment, Ruth heard the old machinery at Main Street. Frank calling from the office. The clock moving while she fixed one more invoice and waited for him to come home. Then she closed Claire's fingers around the watch. Keep it, she said. Not because it's valuable, because you loved him. Claire's eyes filled, but she did not look away. The brass bell rang at the front. Louise called that someone needed Ruth. She left the watch in Claire's hand and walked toward the counter, where her people were waiting.